The emergence of the Dacians as a distinct people cannot be understood without first examining the complex tapestry of Thracian tribal confederations that dominated southeastern Europe during the early Iron Age. The Thracians, a collection of Indo-European speaking peoples, had established themselves across a vast territory stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Carpathian Mountains by the 8th century BC. Within this broader Thracian world, the ancestors of the Dacians began developing their unique identity through a gradual process of cultural differentiation and territorial consolidation. The Thracian Tribal Confederation operated as a loose network of related but autonomous groups, each maintaining their own chieftains, warrior bands, and local customs while sharing fundamental linguistic, religious and cultural elements. Greek sources from the 7th and 6th centuries BC describe the Thracians as fierce warriors who practiced elaborate burial rituals and maintained sophisticated metal-working traditions. However, these same sources begin to distinguish between various Thracian subgroups, noting differences in their settlement patterns, military organisation, and religious practices. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Proto-Dacian tribes began asserting their distinct identity during the 6th century BC, particularly in the regions north of the Danube River. This differentiation process accelerated as these northern Thracian groups encountered different environmental challenges and opportunities compared to their southern cousins. The mountainous terrain of the Carpathians and the fertile plains of Transylvania created unique conditions that fostered the development of specialized agricultural techniques, defensive strategies, and trade networks. The influence of the Hallstatt culture, which dominated Central Europe from approximately 800 to 450 BC, played a crucial role in shaping early Dacian material culture. Hallstatt ironworking techniques spread eastward through trade networks and population movements, reaching the Carpathian Basin during the 7th century BC. Dacian smiths adapted these techniques to their local needs, developing distinctive iron tools, weapons, and agricultural implements. The characteristic Dacian curved sword, known as the falx, evolved during this period from earlier Hallstatt ironworking traditions, combined with local innovations in blade design and metallurgy. Hallstatt burial practices also influenced Dacian funerary customs, though the Dacians modified these traditions according to their own spiritual beliefs. Excavations at sites like Ferrigile and Balta Verde have revealed cremation burials accompanied by iron weapons, bronze ornaments, and pottery that shows clear Hallstatt influences, while maintaining distinctly local characteristics. The pottery in particular displays a unique combination of Hallstatt decorative motifs with indigenous Thracian geometric patterns, creating a hybrid style that became increasingly standardized across Dacian territories. The transition from Hallstatt to Latin cultural influences, beginning around 450 BC, marked another significant phase in Dacian cultural development. Latin artistic styles, characterized by flowing curvilinear designs and sophisticated metalwork, reached Dacian lands through Celtic migrations and trade contacts. However, the Dacians selectively adopted Latin elements while maintaining their own artistic traditions, resulting in a distinctive synthesis that archaeologists can trace through jewellery, weapons, and decorative objects found at numerous excavation sites. Dacian fortifications developed their characteristic features during this period of cultural synthesis. The earliest Dacian settlements were typically located on elevated positions, taking advantage of natural defensive features like hilltops, river bends, and steep slopes. These early fortifications consisted of earth and timber ramparts, reinforced with stone foundations, a construction technique that combined Celtic defensive innovations with local building traditions. The famous Murus Dacicus, or Dacian wall, evolved from these early defensive structures, incorporating sophisticated dry stone masonry techniques that created virtually impregnable fortifications. Settlement patterns across Dacian territories reveal a hierarchical organisation with major fortified centres controlling surrounding agricultural communities and resource extraction sites. Large settlements like Sarmizegetusa Regia in the Burebista Mountains served as political and religious centres, while smaller hill forts controlled strategic passes, river crossings, and mining areas. The distribution of these settlements indicates a sophisticated understanding of territorial control and resource management that extended far beyond simple tribal organisation. The geographic distribution of Dacian tribes encompassed a vast area centred on the Carpathian basin, but extending well beyond these natural boundaries. The core Dacian territory included most of modern-day Romania, with Transylvania serving as the political and cultural heartland. However, Dacian influence extended northward into parts of present-day Ukraine, westward into Hungary, southward across the Danube into Bulgaria, and eastward into Moldova. This extensive territorial range was not uniformly controlled, but rather represented a complex network of allied tribes, tributary relationships, and cultural influence zones. The Carpathian Mountains themselves played a crucial role in Dacian territorial organisation. These mountains provided natural defensive barriers, while also containing rich deposits of gold, silver, iron and salt that form the foundation of Dacian wealth and power. The Dacians developed sophisticated mining techniques, creating extensive underground networks that extracted precious metals from sites like Rosia Montana and Zlatna. These mining operations required coordinated labour forces and technical expertise that contributed to the development of centralised political authority. Transylvania's fertile valleys and plateaus supported dense agricultural populations that provided the demographic foundation for Dacian military and political power. The region's agricultural productivity, combined with its mineral wealth and strategic location, made it the natural centre of Dacian civilization. Archaeological surveys have identified hundreds of Dacian settlements throughout Transylvania, ranging from small farming villages to major fortified centres, indicating a sophisticated settlement hierarchy and administrative system. The Dacian presence in the Moldavian region reflected both territorial expansion and cultural influence. Archaeological evidence suggests that Dacian tribes established settlements along the Prut and Dniester rivers, creating a network of communities that controlled important trade routes connecting the Carpathian region with the Pontic steppes and Greek colonies on the Black Sea coast. These eastern Dacian settlements maintained close cultural connections with the Transylvanian heartland, while adapting to the different environmental and political conditions of the Eastern European plain. Religious practices among the early Dacians centred on the worship of Zalmoxis, a deity whose cult represented a unique synthesis of Thracian spiritual traditions with local innovations and possible external influences. According to Greek sources, particularly Herodotus, Zalmoxis was both a god and a legendary figure who had taught the Dacians about the immortality of the soul and proper religious conduct. The cult of Zalmoxis emphasized the continuity of existence after death, a belief that profoundly influenced Dacian attitudes toward warfare, sacrifice, and social organization. Zalmoxis worship incorporated elements of sky god veneration common among Indo-European peoples, but the Dacians developed unique ritual practices that set their religion apart from other Thracian traditions. Sacred groves played a central role in Dacian religious practice, with certain forest areas designated as holy sites where important ceremonies and sacrifices took place. These sacred spaces were carefully maintained and protected, often located near major settlements or fortifications where they could serve both religious and political functions. The development of distinctive Dacian spiritual beliefs involved the integration of local and animistic traditions with more sophisticated theological concepts, possibly derived from contact with Greek philosophical ideas. Some scholars suggest that the emphasis on soul immortality in Zalmoxis worship reflects influence from Orphic or Pythagorean teachings, though the Dacians adapted these concepts to their own cultural framework. The result was a religious system that provided both spiritual comfort and social cohesion, reinforcing tribal identity and political authority through divine sanction. Dacian religious practices also included elaborate funeral rituals that reflected their beliefs about death and afterlife. Archaeological evidence from burial sites indicates that the Dacians practiced both cremation and inhumation, with the choice of burial method possibly reflecting social status, regional traditions, or temporal changes in religious practice. Grave goods found at Dacian burial sites include weapons, jewellery, pottery, and food offerings, suggesting beliefs about the deceased's continued existence and needs in the afterlife. The priestly class within Dacian society held significant political as well as religious authority, serving as advisors to tribal chiefs and guardians of sacred traditions. These religious leaders maintained oral traditions that preserved historical memories, genealogies, and sacred knowledge essential to Dacian cultural identity. The integration of religious and political authority created a system of governance that combined practical administration with spiritual legitimacy, providing stability and continuity across the diverse Dacian tribal territories. The transformation from loosely affiliated tribal groups to centralized political entities marked a fundamental shift in Dacian society during the 5th through 3rd centuries BC. This consolidation process began with ambitious local chieftains who recognized that territorial fragmentation left individual tribes vulnerable to external threats and internal conflicts. The mountainous terrain of the Carpathians, while providing natural defensive advantages, also created isolated pockets of settlement that had traditionally operated independently. Breaking down these barriers required both military prowess and diplomatic skill, as successful chieftains needed to convince autonomous tribal leaders to surrender portions of their authority for collective security and prosperity. The earliest centralized Dacian political entities emerged in the mineral-rich regions of Transylvania, where control over gold and silver mining operations provided the economic foundation necessary to support larger military forces and administrative structures. Archaeological evidence from sites like Piatra Craiviae and Capalna reveals the construction of more sophisticated fortifications during this period, featuring multi-layered defensive systems that could protect not just individual settlements, but entire valley networks. These fortified complexes served as power projection centres, from which ambitious chieftains could extend their influence over neighbouring territories through a combination of military pressure, economic incentives, and marriage alliances. The consolidation process typically followed a pattern where successful chieftains first secured control over their immediate geographical region, then gradually expanded their authority through conquest or negotiated submission of adjacent territories. The Orasti Mountains became a focal point for this consolidation due to their strategic location, mineral wealth, and defensible terrain. Chieftains who controlled key mountain passes could regulate trade flows, collect tolls, and project military power across multiple valleys simultaneously. This geographical advantage allowed certain leaders to accumulate resources and manpower at rates that far exceeded their competitors, accelerating the formation of proto-kingdoms. Marriage alliances played a crucial role in territorial consolidation, as chieftains sought to bind former enemies into extended kinship networks that reduced the likelihood of future conflicts. These alliances often involved complex negotiations regarding territorial boundaries, resource-sharing agreements, and military obligations during times of external threat. The integration of formerly independent tribes required careful balance between maintaining local customs and establishing unified administrative systems. Successful chieftains demonstrated remarkable political acumen in preserving tribal identities while creating overarching loyalty to the emerging kingdom structure. The development of Dacian military organisation during this period reflected both practical necessities and cultural values that emphasized individual warrior prowess within coordinated group tactics. Dacian warriors traditionally fought as individual champions, seeking personal glory through acts of courage and skill in battle. However, the increasing scale of territorial conflicts required more disciplined formations and coordinated strategies that could effectively counter-organized enemy forces. This transition from heroic individual combat to systematic military organization represented a significant cultural adaptation that maintained warrior traditions while enhancing collective effectiveness. The falx became the signature weapon of Dacian military forces during this consolidation period, evolving from earlier curved blade designs into a highly specialized two-handed weapon capable of devastating effectiveness against both infantry and cavalry opponents. The falx measured approximately 4 to 5 feet in length, with a curved blade that extended from a straight handle, creating a weapon that combined the cutting power of an axe with the reach advantages of a polearm. Dacian smiths developed sophisticated metallurgical techniques to create falx blades that maintained sharp cutting edges while possessing sufficient flexibility to absorb impact shock without breaking. The tactical deployment of falx-wielding warriors required extensive training and coordination, as the weapon's effectiveness depended on precise timing and formation discipline. Dacian military leaders developed specific battle formations that maximized the falx's advantages while minimizing its vulnerabilities. The weapon proved particularly effective against heavily armoured opponents, as its curved blade could hook around shields and deliver devastating cuts to exposed limbs or necks. However, falx warriors remained vulnerable during the weapon's recovery phase after each strike, requiring supporting troops with shields and shorter weapons to protect them during combat. Dacian defensive strategies incorporated sophisticated understanding of terrain advantages and siege warfare principles that reflected both indigenous military traditions and innovations learned through contact with Mediterranean civilizations. The construction of hilltop fortifications followed established patterns, but Dacian engineers developed unique architectural solutions that maximized defensive effectiveness while minimizing construction costs and labor requirements. The famous Murus Dacicis represented the culmination of these defensive innovations, creating wall systems that could withstand prolonged sieges while requiring relatively modest maintenance. The Murus Dacica's construction technique involved creating a framework of horizontal wooden beams anchored by vertical posts, then filling the spaces between with carefully fitted stone blocks. This construction method created walls that possess both flexibility and strength, able to absorb siege engine impacts without collapsing while presenting formidable obstacles to direct assault. The wooden framework distributed stress loads across the entire wall structure, preventing localized failures that could create breach points for attacking forces. Dacian engineers also incorporated drainage systems within their wall construction that prevented water damage and frost heaving that could weaken stone foundations. Warrior culture among the Dacians emphasized personal courage, loyalty to chieftains, and religious devotion that created highly motivated military forces capable of sustained resistance against superior numbers. The integration of Zalmoxis worship into military culture provided spiritual justification for aggressive warfare, while reducing fear of death among warriors who believed in soul immortality. This religious dimension of Dacian military culture created psychological advantages that often surprised foreign opponents who underestimated Dacian determination and resilience in battle. The establishment of major Dacian settlements during this period reflected both defensive necessities and economic opportunities that shaped the emerging kingdom structure. Sarmizegetusa Regia, located in the Carpathian Mountains, began its development as a fortified settlement during the 3rd century BC, though its evolution into the primary Dacian political and religious centre occurred gradually over several generations. The site's selection reflected careful consideration of defensive advantages, water access, agricultural potential, and proximity to mineral resources that could support a large permanent population. Early construction at Sarmizegetusa Regia focused on defensive fortifications that could protect the settlement's core areas while providing refuge for surrounding agricultural communities during times of conflict. The site's natural advantages included steep slopes on multiple sides, reliable water sources, and commanding views over surrounding valleys that provided early warning of approaching enemies. Dacian engineers enhanced these natural features through terracing projects that created level areas for construction, while reinforcing slope stability through stone retaining walls. The sacred precinct at Sarmizegetusa Regia developed simultaneously with the settlement's defensive structures, reflecting the integration of the religious and political authority that characterized Dacian kingdom organization. Archaeological excavations have revealed foundation remains of circular and rectangular temple structures that incorporated both stone and wooden construction elements. These religious buildings served multiple functions as worship centers, meeting places for tribal councils, and repositories for sacred objects and tribal treasures that symbolized political legitimacy. Other major Dacian strongholds in the Carpathian Mountains developed according to similar patterns, with sites like Costesti Setatui, Blidaru, and Piatra Rossi serving specialized functions within an integrated defensive network. Costesti Setatui controlled access routes from the south and west, while its elevated position provided visual communication links with other fortifications through signal fires and smoke columns. The site's construction incorporated multiple defensive lines that could channel attacking forces into predetermined killing zones while providing protected withdrawal routes for defending troops. Blidaru served as both a military outpost and a religious centre, with archaeological evidence indicating the presence of both fortification structures and temple complexes. The site's location provided control over important mountain passes, while maintaining communication links with the primary centres at Sarmizegetusa Regia. Dacian engineers at Blidaru developed innovative water management systems that collected and stored rainwater in underground cisterns, ensuring reliable water supplies during extended sieges. The economic foundations of emerging Dacian kingdoms rested on diversified production systems that combined agricultural surplus, mineral extraction, craft manufacturing, and long-distance trade relationships. Dacian agricultural practices had evolved significantly from earlier subsistence farming to include specialized crop production, animal husbandry operations, and food processing techniques that created marketable surpluses. The fertile valleys of Transylvania proved particularly suitable for grain production, with archaeological evidence indicating the cultivation of wheat, barley, millet, and various legumes that provided both human food and animal fodder. Dacian farmers developed sophisticated crop rotation systems that maintained soil fertility while maximizing production yields. These agricultural techniques incorporated both indigenous knowledge and innovations learned through contact with Mediterranean farming traditions. The use of iron ploughshares, which became widespread during the 4th century BC, significantly increased agricultural productivity by enabling deeper soil cultivation and more efficient land preparation. Dacian agricultural communities also developed specialized tools for harvesting, processing, and storing grain crops that reduced labor requirements while improving food quality and preservation. Animal husbandry among the Dacians emphasized cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs that provided meat, dairy products, leather, wool, and other essential materials for both local consumption and trade purposes. Dacian herders developed transhumance practices that moved livestock between seasonal pastures, maximizing grazing opportunities while reducing pressure on agricultural lands. The mountainous terrain of Dacian territories proved particularly suitable for sheep and goat herding, with high-altitude pastures providing excellent summer grazing, while protected valleys offered winter shelter. Metalworking represented the most sophisticated and economically important craft activity in Dacian society, with gold and silver mining operations providing the wealth necessary to support centralized political structures and military forces. The Apuseni Mountains contained numerous gold deposits, that Dacian miners exploited through both surface placer mining and underground shaft operations. Archaeological investigations at sites like Rosia, Montana, have revealed extensive ancient mining networks that included vertical shafts, horizontal galleries, and sophisticated drainage systems that enabled deep underground extraction. Dacian mining techniques incorporated both indigenous innovations and methods learned through contact with Mediterranean civilizations. The use of fire setting to fracture hard rock formations allowed miners to access ore deposits that would have been impossible to extract using only hand tools. This technique involved heating rock faces with fires, then rapidly cooling them with water to create thermal shock fractures that could be exploited with picks and wedges. Dacian miners also developed hydraulic mining methods that used diverted stream water to wash gold-bearing gravels and separate precious metals from worthless material. Silver mining operations in Dacian territories focused on lead-silver ore deposits that required more complex extraction and processing techniques than gold mining. Dacian metallurgists developed cupellation processes that separated silver from lead through controlled heating and oxidation procedures. These techniques required specialized furnaces, precise temperature control, and skilled craftsmen who understood the chemical processes involved in metal purification. The resulting high-quality silver became a crucial trade commodity that facilitated commercial relationships with Greek colonies and other Mediterranean civilizations. Trade relationships between Dacian kingdoms and Greek colonies along the Black Sea coast developed during the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, creating commercial networks that exchanged Dacian raw materials for manufactured goods, luxury items, and cultural influences. Greek colonies like Histria, Tomis, and Calatis served as intermediary trading centres that connected Dacian territories with broader Mediterranean commercial systems. Dacian merchants transported gold, silver, agricultural products, livestock, and craft goods to these coastal markets, receiving in return wine, olive oil, pottery, metalwork, and other manufactured items. The development of standardized weights and measures facilitated these trade relationships by creating common commercial standards that reduced transaction costs and disputes. Archaeological evidence indicates that Dacian territories adopted modified versions of Greek commercial standards, while maintaining indigenous measurement systems for local transactions. This dual system enabled Dacian merchants to participate effectively in international trade, while preserving traditional commercial practices within their own territories. The commercial networks and political structures that had developed during the previous centuries created the foundation upon which an extraordinary leader would build the first unified Dacian state. Around 70 BC, a chieftain named Burebista emerged from the traditional power centres of the Carpathian Mountains with ambitions that extended far beyond the regional kingdoms that had characterized Dacian political organization for generations. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused primarily on consolidating control within the Carpathian basin, Burebista envisioned a Dacian confederation that would dominate southeastern Europe from the Black Sea to the Pannonian Plain. Burebista's rise to power occurred during a period of increasing external pressures that threatened traditional Dacian independence. Celtic migrations from the west had brought new military techniques and political organizations that challenged established territorial boundaries, while Roman expansion in the Balkans created unprecedented threats to Dacian commercial relationships and political autonomy. Greek colonies along the Black Sea coast faced mounting pressure from both Roman and Pontic forces, disrupting the trade networks that had become essential to Dacian economic prosperity. These converging challenges required responses that exceeded the capabilities of individual kingdoms, creating opportunities for leaders who could articulate visions of unified resistance and coordinated action. The initial phase of Burebista's consolidation campaign focused on securing control over the core Dacian territories in Transylvania through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic negotiation, and religious legitimization. Archaeological evidence from this period indicates significant construction activity at major fortification sites, suggesting that Burebista invested heavily in defensive infrastructure while simultaneously building the military forces necessary for territorial expansion. The enhancement of existing fortifications at Sarmizegetusa included the construction of additional defensive walls, expanded storage facilities, and enlarged residential areas that could accommodate increased administrative personnel and military forces. Burebista's military organisation incorporated traditional Dacian warrior culture, while introducing innovations that enhanced battlefield effectiveness against diverse enemy forces. The falques remained the primary weapon of Dacian heavy infantry, but Burebista's forces also included specialised units equipped with spears, shields, and protective armour that could engage enemy formations using conventional tactics. This military diversification enabled Dacian armies to adapt their combat methods according to specific battlefield conditions and enemy capabilities, rather than relying exclusively on traditional fighting techniques that might prove ineffective against well-organised opponents. The recruitment system that supported Burebista's military expansion drew upon the entire Dacian population through obligations that combined traditional warrior service with more systematic military organisation. Young men from agricultural communities received training in weapons handling, formation fighting, and siege warfare techniques that transformed them from part-time tribal warriors into professional soldiers capable of sustained campaign operations. This military professionalization required significant economic resources to support training programs, equipment production, and campaign logistics that kept armies in the field for extended periods. Burebista's unification of Dacian tribes proceeded systematically across the Carpathian region, with each successful integration providing additional resources and manpower for subsequent expansion operations. The process typically began with diplomatic overtures that emphasized shared cultural identity, common religious beliefs, and mutual benefits from political cooperation. Tribal leaders who accepted Burebista's authority retained significant autonomy over local affairs while contributing military forces and tribute payments to the Central Confederation. Those who resisted faced coordinated military campaigns that combined direct assault with economic pressure designed to isolate opposition forces and encourage defection among their supporters. The integration of former enemies into Burebista's confederation required sophisticated administrative systems that could manage diverse populations while maintaining military readiness for continued expansion. Dacian administrative practices during this period incorporated elements of traditional tribal governance with innovations that enabled centralized coordination across vast territories. Local chieftains retained authority over immediate community affairs, but major decisions regarding military campaigns, resource allocation, and external relationships required approval from Burebista's central administration at Sarmizegetusa. Religious unification played a crucial role in Burebista's consolidation strategy, as shared spiritual beliefs provided cultural foundations for political cooperation among formerly independent tribes. The high priest Dacianius emerged as Burebista's primary collaborator in implementing religious reforms that strengthened Dacian cultural identity while legitimizing centralized political authority. Dacianius possessed extensive knowledge of traditional Dacian religious practices, but he also understood how spiritual beliefs could be adapted to serve political objectives without compromising their essential sacred character. The religious purification campaign led by Dacianius involved the standardization of ritual practices across all territories under Burebista's control, creating unified ceremonial traditions that reinforced political unity through shared spiritual experiences. Sacred groves throughout Dacian territories received enhanced protection and maintenance, while new religious sites were established at strategic locations that served both spiritual and administrative functions. These religious centres became focal points for periodic gatherings that brought together representatives from different tribal groups, creating opportunities for political communication and cultural exchange that strengthened confederation bonds. Licinius implemented a comprehensive prohibition against wine consumption that reflected both religious purification objectives and practical political considerations. The ban on wine served multiple purposes within Burebista's unification strategy, as it eliminated a source of social disruption that had historically contributed to conflicts between tribal groups, while also demonstrating the central authority's ability to regulate personal behaviour across the entire confederation. Archaeological evidence from this period indicates a dramatic reduction in wine-related artefacts at Dacian sites, suggesting widespread compliance with the prohibition despite its potential unpopularity among certain population groups. The wine prohibition also carried economic implications that strengthened Dacian independence from external trade relationships, while encouraging the development of alternative agricultural products. Dacian farmers who had previously cultivated grapes for wine production redirected their efforts toward grain crops, livestock, and other agricultural activities that supported military campaigns and population growth. This agricultural reorientation reduced Dacian dependence on imported wine, while creating surplus production that could support larger military forces and administrative structures. Cultural identity strengthening under Burebista and Licinius involved the promotion of distinctly Dacian artistic traditions, architectural styles, and craft techniques that distinguished Confederation members from neighbouring peoples. Dacian metalworkers developed increasingly sophisticated decorative techniques that incorporated traditional geometric patterns with new artistic elements that celebrated military victories and political achievements. These artistic developments created visual symbols of Dacian identity that reinforced political loyalty while demonstrating the cultural sophistication of the Confederation to external observers. The territorial expansion that followed Dacian unification proceeded along multiple axes simultaneously, as Burebista's forces launched coordinated campaigns against Celtic tribes to the west, Thracian groups to the south, and Greek settlements along the Black Sea coast. The conquest of neighbouring Celtic territories required different military strategies than those used against Dacian tribes, as Celtic warriors employed different weapons, tactics, and fortification techniques that demanded adaptive responses from Burebista's forces. Celtic settlements typically featured extensive earthwork defences surrounded by timber palisades that could resist direct assault but remained vulnerable to siege warfare techniques. Dacian military engineers developed specialised siege equipment designed to overcome Celtic fortifications while minimising casualties among attacking forces. These siege techniques incorporated elements of Mediterranean military engineering that Dacian forces had encountered through their contacts with Greek colonies and Roman military operations in the region. The construction of siege towers, battering rams, and catapult devices required skilled craftsmen and significant material resources, but these investments enabled Dacian forces to reduce fortified positions that would have been impregnable using traditional assault methods. The integration of conquered Celtic territories into Burebista's confederation followed patterns established during the Dacian unification process, with local leaders who submitted peacefully retaining authority over their communities while those who resisted facing replacement by Dacian administrators. Celtic populations possessed valuable skills in metalworking, agriculture, and trade that enhanced the Confederation's economic capabilities, while Celtic warriors who accepted Dacian authority provided additional military manpower for subsequent expansion campaigns. Thracian campaigns presented different challenges, as these populations shared cultural and linguistic connections with the Dacians that complicated military and political relationships. Some Thracian tribes viewed Dacian expansion as liberation from foreign oppression, while others regarded it as conquest by distant relatives who had abandoned traditional ways of life. Burebista's forces needed to distinguish between Thracian groups that could be integrated through negotiation and those that required military conquest, a process that demanded sophisticated intelligence gathering and diplomatic skills. The conquest of Thracian territories provided Burebista's confederation with access to important trade routes connecting the Danube River with the Aegean Sea, significantly expanding Dacian commercial opportunities while reducing dependence on Black Sea coastal trade. Thracian agricultural techniques, particularly in wine production and livestock management, offered valuable knowledge that could be adapted to Dacian environmental conditions despite the religious prohibition on wine consumption. The integration of Thracian populations also provided linguistic and cultural intermediaries who could facilitate diplomatic relationships with other Thracian groups and Greek cities. Greek cities along the western Black Sea coast represented the most challenging targets for Dacian expansion, as these settlements possessed sophisticated defensive systems, professional military forces, and potential support from external powers including Rome and various Hellenistic kingdoms. The Greek colonies had developed extensive commercial networks that provided them with resources and military assistance that far exceeded what individual cities could generate independently. Attacking these cities required careful preparation and strategic coordination that could prevent them from receiving external reinforcement during siege operations. Burebista's campaigns against Greek cities employed combined land and naval operations that isolated target settlements while preventing escape or resupply by sea. Dacian forces constructed temporary naval vessels using local timber and captured Greek ships to create improvised fleets capable of blockading harbours and intercepting supply convoys. These naval operations required Dacian warriors to master unfamiliar fighting techniques and navigation skills, demonstrating the Confederation's adaptability and learning capacity under Burebista's leadership. The capture of Greek cities provided Dacian forces with access to advanced military technologies, including siege engines, naval equipment, and metallurgical techniques that enhanced their capabilities for subsequent campaigns. Greek craftsmen and engineers who survived the conquest often entered Dacian service, contributing their specialized knowledge to Confederation military and economic development. The integration of Greek technical expertise with traditional Dacian skills created hybrid technologies that proved superior to either tradition alone. Diplomatic relationships between Burebista's Confederation and Rome developed during a period of intense civil conflict within the Roman Republic that created both opportunities and dangers for Dacian foreign policy. Roman expansion into the Balkans had brought Roman forces into direct contact with Dacian territories, creating potential for both cooperation and conflict, depending on the specific circumstances and personalities involved. Roman civil wars provided Burebista with opportunities to influence Roman politics through selective support for different factions, but these interventions also risked provoking Roman retaliation, regardless of which faction ultimately achieved victory. Burebista's involvement in Roman civil wars reflected sophisticated understanding of Roman political dynamics and strategic calculation of potential benefits and risks associated with different policy options. The Dacian king recognized that Roman internal conflicts created temporary weaknesses that could be exploited to advance Dacian interests. But he also understood that Roman military capabilities remained formidable, even during periods of political instability. Dacian diplomatic strategy therefore emphasized measured involvement that could influence Roman behavior without provoking overwhelming retaliation. The relationship between Burebista and Pompey the Great developed through intermediaries who recognized mutual interests in opposing Julius Caesar's growing power within the Roman Republic. Pompey's control over eastern Mediterranean territories created natural alignment with Dacian interests in maintaining independence from Roman expansion, while Burebista's military forces represented potential allies who could threaten Caesar's positions in Gaul and Germania. Archaeological evidence suggests increased diplomatic activity between Dacian territories and Roman-controlled regions during this period, indicating regular communication between the two powers. Burebista's potential support for Pompey against Caesar involved complex negotiations regarding military assistance, territorial arrangements, and post-war political relationships that would govern future interactions between Dacian and Roman territories. These diplomatic discussions required Dacian representatives to navigate sophisticated Roman political protocols, while protecting essential Dacian interests and maintaining flexibility for changing circumstances. The assassination of Caesar in 44 BC dramatically altered the strategic situation, eliminating immediate threats to Dacian independence while creating new uncertainties about future Roman policies towards southeastern Europe. The assassination of Burebista in 44 BC created an immediate succession crisis that threatened to unravel the vast confederation he had spent decades constructing. The circumstances surrounding his death remain shrouded in historical uncertainty, with various ancient sources suggesting different motives and perpetrators. Strabo mentions internal opposition from Dacian nobles who resented centralized authority, while other accounts point to external enemies who recognize that eliminating Burebista represented the most effective method of weakening Dacian power. Regardless of the specific circumstances, his death occurred at a critical moment when the Confederation required strong leadership to maintain unity among diverse tribal groups that had only recently been integrated under central authority. Licinius emerged from this political chaos as both the logical and necessary successor to Burebista's authority, though his path to power differed significantly from that of his predecessor. Unlike Burebista, who had achieved dominance primarily through military conquest and political maneuvering, Licinius possessed religious authority that provided alternative sources of legitimacy among Dacian populations. His role as high priest of the Zalmoxian cult had made him Burebista's closest advisor and collaborator in implementing the religious reforms that had strengthened Dacian cultural identity throughout the Confederation. This religious foundation enabled Licinius to claim authority based on divine sanction rather than purely secular power, creating a different but equally effective basis for political control. The regency period that began around 44 BC represented a fundamental shift in Dacian governance, from primarily military leadership toward a more complex system that integrated religious, legal, and administrative authority under unified direction. Licinius recognized that maintaining Confederation unity required more than military force or charismatic leadership. It demanded institutional structures that could survive individual leaders and provide continuity across generational transitions. His approach to governance emphasized the development of formal legal codes, standardized religious practices, and administrative procedures that would create lasting foundations for Dacian political organization. Licinius faced immediate challenges from tribal leaders who had submitted to Burebista's military power, but questioned the authority of a priest-king who lacked comparable martial credentials. Several peripheral territories attempted to reassert independence following Burebista's death, calculating that religious authority alone could not compel obedience from populations accustomed to warrior leadership. These challenges required Licinius to demonstrate that his governance model could maintain territorial integrity and military effectiveness while providing superior administrative services that justified centralized authority. The religious legitimacy that Licinius brought to Dacian leadership enabled him to implement reforms that would have been impossible under purely secular authority. His deep understanding of Zalmoxian theology provided him with sophisticated arguments for political obedience based on divine will rather than human coercion. Dacian populations who might have resisted secular administrative demands accepted similar requirements when presented as religious obligations necessary for spiritual purification and divine favour. This religious framework transformed potentially contentious political reforms into sacred duties that carried both temporal and eternal consequences for compliance or resistance. The codification of Dacian laws under Licinius represented the first systematic attempt to create unified legal standards across the entire Confederation territory. Previous legal practices had varied significantly among different tribal groups, with each community maintaining its own customary laws and judicial procedures that reflected local traditions and specific historical circumstances. This legal diversity had created administrative complications and jurisdictional conflicts that undermined Confederation unity. particularly in cases involving disputes between members of different tribal groups or communities located near territorial boundaries. Decebalus approached legal codification through careful synthesis of existing tribal laws rather than imposing entirely new legal frameworks that might have provoked resistance from traditional communities. His legal scholars conducted extensive surveys of customary practices throughout Dacian territories, identifying common principles and procedures that could serve as foundations for unified legal codes. Where tribal practices conflicted, Decebalus established standardized procedures that incorporated elements from multiple traditions, while emphasizing principles derived from Zalmoxian religious teachings about justice, community responsibility, and divine judgment. The resulting legal code addressed fundamental issues of property rights, inheritance procedures, criminal justice, and commercial relationships that had previously been governed by inconsistent local practices. Property law under the Decebalus Code established clear procedures for land ownership, resource extraction rights, and territorial boundaries that reduced conflicts between communities while providing legal frameworks for economic development. Inheritance laws created standardized procedures for transferring property and political authority across generational lines, reducing succession disputes that had historically contributed to political instability. Criminal justice procedures under the new legal code emphasized restitution and community service rather than purely punitive measures, reflecting Zalmoxian beliefs about spiritual redemption and social harmony. Serious crimes that threatened community safety or religious purity could result in exile or death, but most offences required offenders to compensate victims and perform community service that demonstrated their commitment to social rehabilitation. These justice procedures incorporated traditional Dacian concepts of honour and shame, while providing systematic methods for resolving disputes and maintaining social order. Commercial law codification addressed the complex trade relationships that had developed throughout the Confederation, establishing standardized weights, measures, and currency systems that facilitated long-distance commerce while protecting local merchants from fraudulent practices. The legal code specified procedures for contract enforcement, debt collection, and dispute resolution that enabled merchants to operate confidently across tribal boundaries without fear of arbitrary legal decisions or inconsistent judicial procedures. These commercial protections encouraged economic development while generating tax revenues that supported Confederation administrative and military expenses. The strengthening of the Zalmoxian cult under Decebalus involved both theological development and institutional expansion that transformed traditional Dacian religious practices into sophisticated systems capable of supporting complex political and social organizations. Zalmoxian theology had previously emphasized individual spiritual development and personal relationships with divine forces, but Decebalus developed communal aspects of religious practice that reinforced social bonds and political loyalty among Confederation members. These theological innovations maintained traditional spiritual beliefs while adapting them to serve the practical needs of large-scale political organization. Religious institutional expansion under Decebalus included the establishment of formal priesthood hierarchies that could provide religious services throughout Confederation territories while maintaining doctrinal consistency and administrative coordination. Local priests received training at central religious schools that standardized theological knowledge and ritual procedures, creating professional religious classes that could serve both spiritual and administrative functions within their communities. These priests became intermediaries between central authority and local populations, explaining government policies in religious terms while reporting local concerns and conditions to central administrators. Sacred site development during the Decebalus period involved both the enhancement of existing religious locations and the creation of new ceremonial centres that served Confederation-wide religious and political functions. Sarmizegetusa received extensive religious construction, that transformed it into the primary pilgrimage destination for Dacian populations throughout the Confederation. Archaeological evidence indicates the construction of multiple temple complexes, ceremonial plazas, and residential facilities that could accommodate large numbers of religious visitors during major festivals and ceremonies. The sacred calendar established by Dacianus created regular occasions for confederation-wide religious observances that brought together representatives from all tribal groups and territorial regions. These religious festivals served multiple functions as spiritual celebrations, political gatherings, and commercial opportunities that strengthened Confederation unity through shared experiences and mutual interactions. The timing of major festivals corresponded with agricultural seasons and astronomical events that had traditional significance, while incorporating new elements that celebrated Confederation achievements and political unity. Theocratic governance elements introduced by Dacianus represented sophisticated attempts to integrate religious authority with practical, administrative needs without compromising either spiritual authenticity or governmental effectiveness. Religious councils composed of senior priests from different regions provided advisory services to political administrators while maintaining independence in purely spiritual matters. This separation of religious and political spheres prevented conflicts between secular and sacred authority, while ensuring that government policies remained consistent with Dacian religious values and cultural traditions. The architectural achievements during Dacianus's rule reflected both practical defensive needs and symbolic expressions of Dacian cultural sophistication that demonstrated Confederation capabilities to both internal and external audiences. Construction projects during this period emphasized monumental scale and technical innovation that showcased Dacian engineering capabilities while serving practical functions related to defense, administration, and religious observance. These building programs required coordinated labor forces, specialized technical skills, and significant material resources that demonstrated the Confederation's organizational capabilities and economic strength. Defensive architecture improvements focused on enhancing existing fortification systems while developing new construction techniques that could provide superior protection against evolving military threats. The Burebista construction method reached its highest development during the Dacianus period, with engineers perfecting stone-fitting techniques and structural engineering principles that created virtually impregnable defensive walls. These fortifications incorporated sophisticated features, including multiple defensive lines, concealed sally ports, underground storage facilities, and integrated water management systems that could sustain prolonged sieges. Sacred architecture development during this period created some of the most sophisticated religious structures in ancient Europe, combining traditional Dacian building techniques with innovations that reflected increased technical knowledge and aesthetic sophistication. Temple construction at Sarmizegetusa, Regia, and other major religious centres incorporated precise astronomical alignments that connected religious ceremonies with celestial events while demonstrating Dacian astronomical knowledge. These religious buildings featured complex stone masonry, wooden framework systems, and decorative elements that created impressive architectural compositions suitable for major religious and political ceremonies. Engineering achievements under Dacianus included sophisticated water management systems that provided reliable water supplies for major settlements while supporting agricultural development in previously marginal areas. Dacian engineers developed techniques for constructing underground aqueducts, storage systems, and distribution systems that could deliver water across significant distances and elevation changes. These hydraulic engineering projects required precise surveying, advanced construction techniques, and ongoing maintenance that demonstrated Confederation capabilities for large-scale infrastructure development. Road construction during the Dacianus period created improved communication and transportation networks that connected major Confederation centres while providing military advantages for rapid troop movement and strategic coordination. Dacian road builders adapted Roman engineering techniques to local terrain conditions, creating transportation systems that could function effectively in mountainous environments while requiring minimal maintenance. These roads facilitated both military operations and commercial activities that strengthened Confederation unity and economic development. The fragmentation that began following Decianus's death around 27 BC resulted from structural weaknesses within the Confederation system that had been masked by his exceptional leadership capabilities and religious authority. Unlike Burebista, whose military charisma had provided clear succession expectations, Decianus's theocratic leadership model created ambiguous succession procedures that enabled multiple claimants to assert legitimate authority claims. The integration of religious and political authority that had strengthened Decianus's governance became a source of instability when no single successor possessed comparable credentials in both spheres. Regional leaders who had accepted centralized authority under Decianus's religious legitimacy began reasserting traditional tribal autonomy when faced with succession uncertainty and competing authority claims. The Confederation's territorial extent had grown beyond the capacity of any single leader to maintain direct personal control, creating opportunities for ambitious regional commanders to establish independent power bases. These centrifugal forces had been contained by Decianus's religious authority and administrative innovations, but his death removed the personal bonds that had held diverse populations together under unified leadership. The emergence of multiple Dacian kingdoms following Confederation fragmentation created a complex political landscape that would define southeastern European politics for the subsequent century. Former Confederation territories divided along both geographical and tribal lines, with leaders establishing independent kingdoms that maintained Dacian cultural identity while pursuing separate political and military objectives. These successor kingdoms retained many of the administrative, legal, and religious innovations introduced during the Burebista and Decianus periods, but they lacked the coordinated strength that had made the unified Confederation a major regional power capable of influencing Roman politics and Mediterranean affairs. The political fragmentation that followed Decianus's death created a fundamentally altered strategic environment that would shape Roman-Dacian relations for the next century. Augustus, having emerged victorious from the civil wars that had torn apart the Roman Republic, inherited a complex situation along the Danube frontier where multiple Dacian kingdoms now controlled territories that had once been unified under Burebista's confederation. The new emperor faced the challenge of establishing stable relationships with these fragmented Dacian polities while securing Roman interests in a region that had become increasingly important to imperial security and economic prosperity. The early years of Augustus's reign witnessed a cautious approach to Dacian affairs that reflected both Roman military limitations and the uncertain political situation north of the Danube. Roman forces were still consolidating control over recently conquered territories in Pannonia and Moesia, creating logistical constraints that prevented large-scale military operations against Dacian kingdoms. Simultaneously, the fragmented nature of Dacian political authority made it difficult for Roman diplomats to identify reliable negotiating partners who could speak for significant territorial regions or guarantee compliance with treaty obligations across multiple tribal groups. Initial Roman diplomatic efforts focused on establishing tributary relationships with individual Dacian kingdoms through a combination of military pressure, economic incentives, and political recognition that would create buffer zones along the Danube frontier. Roman governors in Moesia and Pannonia conducted regular diplomatic missions to Dacian courts, offering Roman protection against rival kingdoms in exchange for tribute payments, military assistance, and acceptance of Roman oversight over certain territorial disputes. These early agreements typically involved limited commitments from both sides, as neither Romans nor Dacians possessed sufficient knowledge of each other's capabilities and intentions to risk more comprehensive arrangements. The Dacian kingdoms that emerged from Confederation fragmentation pursued varying strategies toward Roman expansion, with some leaders seeking accommodation, while others maintained aggressive independence that periodically resulted in cross-border conflicts. Kingdoms located closer to Roman territorial boundaries generally adopted more cooperative approaches, recognizing that proximity to Roman military bases made resistance potentially catastrophic. More distant kingdoms, particularly those controlling the mountainous regions of Transylvania, maintained traditional independence while carefully monitoring Roman activities and preparing defensive measures against potential future expansion. Border skirmishes during the Augustan period typically involved relatively small-scale raids and counter-raids that reflected both opportunistic aggression and systematic testing of enemy capabilities and responses. Dacian warbands periodically crossed the Danube to raid Roman settlements in Moesia, seeking livestock, slaves, and portable wealth while avoiding direct confrontation with regular Roman military units. These raids served multiple purposes beyond simple plunder, as they provided intelligence about Roman defensive arrangements, tested Roman response times and capabilities, and maintained warrior traditions among Dacian populations who had grown accustomed to regular military activity during the Confederation period. Roman military responses to Dacian raids followed established frontier management procedures that emphasized rapid retaliation combined with diplomatic efforts to prevent escalation into larger conflicts. Roman commanders typically launched punitive expeditions that crossed the Danube to strike Dacian settlements responsible for raids, capturing prisoners and livestock while avoiding engagement with major Dacian military forces that might transform limited punitive actions into full-scale warfare. These Roman counter-raids demonstrated imperial military capabilities, while providing opportunities to gather intelligence about Dacian political relationships, military organisation, and territorial control patterns. The establishment of client relationships between Rome and various Dacian kingdoms required careful negotiation of terms that balanced Roman security interests with Dacian autonomy concerns and internal political dynamics. Roman client arrangements typically involved formal recognition of Dacian royal authority in exchange for tribute payments, military assistance obligations, and acceptance of Roman mediation in territorial disputes with neighbouring kingdoms. These agreements provided Rome with buffer zones against more distant threats, while giving cooperative Dacian rulers access to Roman military support against rivals who might challenge their authority or territorial claims. Client relationship management presented ongoing challenges for both Roman administrators and Dacian rulers who needed to balance competing demands and expectations while maintaining domestic political support. Roman governors expected reliable tribute payments, prompt military assistance when requested, and consistent cooperation with Roman strategic objectives that might conflict with traditional Dacian interests or cultural practices. Dacian client rulers faced domestic opposition from traditionalist factions who viewed cooperation with Rome as cultural betrayal, while simultaneously needing Roman support to maintain authority against rival claimants or hostile neighbouring kingdoms. The reign of Tiberius witnessed increasing tensions along the Danube frontier as Dacian kingdoms began recovering from the political disruption that had followed Confederation collapse. Several Dacian rulers initiated territorial consolidation campaigns aimed at recreating larger political units that could more effectively resist Roman pressure and pursue independent foreign policies. These consolidation efforts inevitably produced conflicts between rival Dacian kingdoms that created opportunities for Roman intervention, while also generating larger and more powerful Dacian political entities that posed greater potential threats to Roman interests. Durostiopaneus emerged during this period as one of the most successful Dacian leaders in the territorial consolidation process, establishing control over significant portions of Transylvania through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic alliance, and marriage connections that rebuilt networks of cooperation among formerly independent kingdoms. Archaeological evidence from major Dacian sites during this period indicates renewed construction activity and military preparation, that suggests coordinated planning among allied kingdoms. Fortification improvements at sites like Costesti Cetatouie and Piatra Rossi incorporated new defensive features that reflected both traditional Dacian engineering techniques and innovations learned through observation of Roman military architecture. The military organization that Burebista developed combined traditional Dacian warrior culture with systematic training and equipment standardization that created more effective fighting forces capable of sustained operations against professional Roman armies. Dacian military reforms during this period emphasized improved armor protection, standardized weapon production, and coordinated tactical formations that could exploit traditional Dacian advantages in mountainous terrain, while providing greater effectiveness in open battlefield conditions. The falx remained the signature weapon of Dacian heavy infantry, but military units now included specialized formations equipped with spears, shields, and protective gear that could engage Roman legions using conventional tactics. Roman intelligence gathering regarding Dacian military developments relied heavily on information provided by client rulers, merchants, and diplomatic missions that provided regular reports about political changes, military preparations, and territorial disputes throughout Dacian regions. These intelligence networks enabled Roman commanders to monitor potential threats while identifying opportunities for diplomatic intervention that could prevent hostile coalitions from forming or becoming militarily significant. Roman intelligence operations also included direct reconnaissance missions that crossed the Danube to observe Dacian fortifications, assess military capabilities, and establish contact with potential allies or informants within Dacian territories. The gradual reunification of Dacian territories under leaders like Burebista created increasingly complex diplomatic situations that required Roman policymakers to balance competing strategic objectives while managing limited military resources and political constraints. Supporting weaker Dacian kingdoms against stronger neighbours might prevent dangerous consolidation, but could also create ongoing obligations for military intervention that exceeded Roman capabilities or political willingness. Alternatively, accepting Dacian reunification might reduce administrative complications while creating more powerful potential enemies that could threaten Roman territorial security and economic interests. Economic relationships between Rome and Dacian kingdoms developed along multiple channels that included both official trade agreements and informal commercial networks that operated across territorial boundaries despite political tensions. Dacian gold and silver continued to flow into Roman markets through various intermediaries, while Roman manufactured goods, wine, and luxury items found ready markets among Dacian elites who sought to demonstrate their wealth and cultural sophistication. These commercial relationships created mutual dependencies that provided incentives for peaceful coexistence, while also generating economic resources that could support military preparations on both sides. The control of Danube river crossings became an increasingly contentious issue as both Roman and Dacian territories expanded their economic and military activities in the region. Strategic river crossing points provided essential access for trade, military operations, and diplomatic communications that made their control crucial for both defensive and offensive strategic planning. Roman military engineers constructed fortified bridgeheads at key crossing points, while Dacian forces established corresponding defensive positions that could contest Roman river crossing attempts during potential future conflicts. Tribute payment obligations created ongoing sources of tension between Roman administrators and Dacian client rulers who faced domestic opposition to payments that many Dacian populations viewed as humiliating submissions to foreign authority. The amounts and forms of tribute payments required careful negotiation that balanced Roman revenue needs with Dacian payment capabilities and political acceptability. Roman demands for tribute in gold and silver created particular difficulties for Dacian kingdoms that needed these precious metals for their own monetary systems and international trade relationships. The reign of Claudius marked a significant shift in Roman Dacian policy as imperial expansion priorities focused increasingly on consolidating control over territories closer to the Danube frontier, while developing more systematic approaches to managing barbarian relationships. Claudius's conquest of Britain demonstrated Roman capabilities for large-scale military operations, while also absorbing significant military resources that limited options for simultaneous expansion in southeastern Europe. This strategic prioritization created opportunities for Dacian kingdoms to strengthen their positions without facing immediate Roman military pressure. Dacian military preparations during the Claudian period reflected growing confidence that Roman expansion could be successfully resisted through proper defensive planning and coordinated resistance efforts. Archaeological evidence indicates substantial investment in fortification construction and improvement throughout Dacian territories, with particular emphasis on sites that controlled mountain passes and river crossings essential for any Roman invasion attempts. These defensive preparations incorporated lessons learned from observing Roman siege warfare techniques while maintaining traditional Dacian advantages in mountainous terrain that favoured defensive operations. The development of Dacian diplomatic relationships with other barbarian peoples created potential alliance networks that could complicate Roman strategic planning while providing Dacian kingdoms with additional military and economic resources. Dacian rulers established contacts with Germanic tribes along the northern Danube, Sarmatian peoples in the eastern plains, and various Thracian groups that had maintained independence from Roman control. These diplomatic initiatives aimed to create coordinated resistance networks that could prevent Roman forces from concentrating overwhelming military superiority against individual targets. Roman responses to Dacian diplomatic activities included both direct military pressure and counter-diplomatic efforts designed to prevent hostile coalitions from forming or becoming militarily effective. Roman commanders conducted periodic military demonstrations along the Danube frontier that reminded potential Roman enemies of imperial military capabilities while providing opportunities to assess barbarian military preparations and alliance relationships. Simultaneously, Roman diplomats worked to maintain client relationships and create divisions among potential enemies through selective application of rewards, threats, and political recognition. The reign of Nero witnessed increasing Dacian confidence and territorial expansion that brought Dacian forces into more frequent contact with Roman frontier defences. Dacian military operations during this period included both traditional raiding activities and more systematic territorial conquest campaigns that challenged Roman client relationships and threatened imperial territorial security. These Dacian military successes reflected both improved military organisation and Roman distraction with other imperial priorities that reduced available resources for Danube frontier security. Domitian's accession to imperial power in 81 AD marked the beginning of a more aggressive Roman approach to Dacian affairs that would ultimately lead to direct military confrontation. The new emperor faced significant domestic political pressures that made military success essential for maintaining imperial authority, while Dacian territorial expansion under increasingly effective leadership threatened Roman strategic interests that could no longer be ignored or managed through diplomatic means alone. The stage was set for the direct military confrontation that both sides had been preparing for throughout the previous decades of cautious diplomatic manoeuvring and limited border conflicts. The strategic importance of Dacia to Roman imperial interests had become increasingly apparent as the province's gold mines provided essential revenue for imperial finances, while its geographical position offered crucial advantages for controlling the entire Danube frontier region. Roman military planners recognized that Dacian territorial consolidation under effective leadership posed existential threats to Roman control over southeastern Europe that required decisive military responses regardless of the costs and risks involved. The wealth generated by Dacian gold mines had enabled the construction of sophisticated fortifications and maintenance of professional military forces that made Dacian kingdoms formidable opponents capable of inflicting significant casualties on Roman armies while potentially inspiring other barbarian peoples to challenge imperial authority. The prestige factor in Roman imperial politics made successful resolution of the Dacian challenge essential for any emperor seeking to maintain domestic political support and military loyalty. Previous emperors had avoided direct confrontation with unified Dacian forces, but this restraint had been interpreted by some Roman political observers as weakness that undermined imperial credibility and encouraged barbarian aggression throughout the frontier regions. Domitian's political position required military victories that would demonstrate imperial strength, while providing opportunities for territorial expansion and wealth acquisition that could support domestic political programs and military expenses. The strategic calculations that had driven Domitian's increasingly aggressive Dacian policies would soon encounter their most formidable opponent in the person of Decebalus, who emerged as the paramount Dacian leader around 87 AD through a combination of military prowess, political acumen and religious authority that surpassed even the legendary achievements of Burebista. Unlike his predecessors who had built their power primarily through conquest or spiritual leadership, Decebalus demonstrated an unprecedented ability to synthesize military, diplomatic, and administrative capabilities that transformed the fragmented Dacian kingdoms into a unified state capable of challenging Roman imperial expansion on equal terms. Decebalus's rise to power occurred during a period when Dacian resistance to Roman pressure had reached a critical juncture, with individual kingdoms proving insufficient to counter Roman military capabilities while lacking the coordination necessary for effective collective defence. The name Decebalus itself, meaning strong as 10 men, reflected both personal martial reputation and symbolic representation of unified Dacian strength that could match Roman organisational advantages through superior leadership and strategic planning. Archaeological evidence from major Dacian sites during this period indicates immediate and systematic military preparations that suggest Decebalus possessed clear strategic vision regarding the inevitable confrontation with Roman forces. The consolidation of Dacian territories under Decebalus's authority proceeded through carefully orchestrated campaigns that combined military pressure with diplomatic negotiation and religious legitimization in ways that minimized internal resistance while maximizing collective strength. Unlike previous unification efforts that had relied primarily on conquest or spiritual authority, Decebalus demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the diverse motivations and concerns that influenced different Dacian communities, crafting individualized approaches that address specific local interests while advancing overall strategic objectives. The Carpathian Mountains region served as the foundation for Decebalus's territorial consolidation, providing both the symbolic legitimacy associated with traditional Dacian political centres and the practical advantages of defensible terrain, mineral wealth, and established fortification networks. Decebalus invested heavily in expanding and improving the fortification systems at Sarmizegetusa Regia, transforming the site into a military and administrative complex capable of coordinating resistance activities across the entire Dacian territory, while serving as an impregnable refuge during potential siege operations. Military reforms implemented by Decebalus addressed fundamental weaknesses in traditional Dacian military organisation, while preserving cultural elements that provided psychological advantages and maintained warrior morale. The traditional emphasis on individual combat prowess remained central to Dacian military culture, but Decebalus introduced systematic training programs that taught coordinated formation fighting, siege warfare techniques, and specialized tactical procedures designed to counter specific Roman military advantages. These reforms required significant investment in training facilities, equipment production, and professional military instructors who could transform traditional warriors into disciplined soldiers capable of sustained campaign operations. The falx underwent further development under Decebalus's military reforms, with Dacian smiths perfecting metallurgical techniques that produce superior blade quality while developing specialized training methods that maximize the weapon's effectiveness in formation combat. Archaeological discoveries of falx blades from this period reveal sophisticated heat treatment and edge hardening techniques that created weapons capable of penetrating Roman armor while maintaining structural integrity during extended combat. The psychological impact of the falx on Roman soldiers became a significant factor in Dacian military effectiveness, as Roman accounts describe the terror induced by Dacian chargers wielding these distinctive curved blades. Administrative reorganization under Decebalus created systematic governance structures that could manage the complex logistical requirements of prolonged military resistance while maintaining civilian economic productivity and social stability. The administrative system incorporated elements from previous Dacian political traditions, while introducing innovations that reflected Decebalus's understanding of Roman organizational methods and the specific challenges posed by coordinating resistance across diverse territorial regions and tribal groups. The territorial extent of Decebalus's kingdom at its zenith encompassed virtually all regions that had been included in Burebista's original confederation, with additional territories that reflected both military conquest and diplomatic alliance formation. Archaeological evidence indicates Dacian influence extending from the Tisa River in the west to the Dniester River in the east, and from the Carpathian Mountains in the north to the Danube River in the south. This territorial scope required sophisticated communication networks, administrative hierarchies, and military organization that could maintain unity and coordination across distances that challenged ancient transportation and communication capabilities. Fortification improvements throughout Dacian territories under Decebalus incorporated both traditional Murus Dizicus construction techniques and innovations that reflected careful study of Roman siege warfare methods and defensive architecture. The enhanced fortification systems featured multiple defensive lines, concealed positions for artillery equipment, underground storage facilities, and integrated water management systems that could sustain prolonged sieges while providing bases for offensive operations against Roman positions. These defensive improvements required coordinated labour forces, specialised engineering skills, and significant material resources that demonstrated the kingdom's organisational capabilities and economic strength. The development of Dacian siege warfare capabilities represented one of Decebalus's most significant military innovations, as traditional Dacian military culture had emphasised mobile warfare and defensive operations rather than the systematic reduction of fortified positions. Dacian engineers developed catapults, battering rams, and siege towers that incorporated both indigenous engineering traditions and techniques learned through observation of Roman military operations. These siege capabilities enabled Dacian forces to attack Roman fortifications and settlements rather than limiting themselves to defensive operations, significantly expanding strategic options and forcing Roman commanders to defend extended perimeters rather than concentrating forces for offensive operations. Intelligence networks established by Decebalus provided systematic information gathering capabilities that enabled Dacian military planners to monitor Roman military preparations, assess enemy capabilities, and identify strategic opportunities for offensive operations. These intelligence operations included both formal diplomatic missions that gathered information through official channels and covert reconnaissance activities that provided detailed military intelligence about Roman troop dispositions, supply arrangements, and strategic planning. The effectiveness of Dacian intelligence gathering became apparent in subsequent military operations, where Dacian forces demonstrated detailed knowledge of Roman military preparations and strategic intentions. Diplomatic initiatives undertaken by Decebalus aimed to create anti-Roman coalitions that could provide military assistance, economic support, and strategic coordination that would prevent Roman forces from concentrating overwhelming superiority against Dacian territories. These diplomatic efforts extended throughout southeastern Europe and beyond, establishing contacts with Germanic tribes, Sarmatian peoples, Thracian groups, and even distant powers like the Parthian Empire that shared interests in limiting Roman expansion. The scope and sophistication of these diplomatic activities reflected Decebalus' understanding that successful resistance required international cooperation and coordinated strategic planning. The relationship between Decebalus and Germanic tribal leaders involved complex negotiations regarding military assistance, territorial arrangements, and post-conflict political relationships that required careful balance between immediate military needs and long-term strategic objectives. Germanic tribes possessed military capabilities that could significantly enhance Dacian resistance efforts, but their own territorial ambitions and cultural differences created potential conflicts that required diplomatic skill to manage effectively. Archaeological evidence suggests increased contact between Dacian and Germanic territories during this period, with material culture exchanges indicating regular diplomatic and commercial relationships. Sarmatian diplomatic relationships provided Decebalus with potential access to cavalry forces and nomadic military techniques that could complement traditional Dacian infantry capabilities, while providing strategic mobility advantages against Roman military operations. Sarmatian heavy cavalry, equipped with long lances and protective armour, represented military capabilities that Roman forces had historically found difficult to counter effectively. The integration of Sarmatian cavalry tactics with Dacian infantry formations created combined arms capabilities that significantly enhanced Dacian military effectiveness, while providing strategic flexibility for both offensive and defensive operations. Economic policies implemented by Decebalus aimed to maximize resource extraction and production capabilities while maintaining social stability and popular support for military resistance efforts. The gold and silver mines that provided the foundation of Dacian wealth received increased investment in extraction equipment, processing facilities, and transportation networks that could maintain production levels despite Roman military pressure and potential siege conditions. These economic preparations included the development of alternative trade routes that could function despite Roman attempts to impose economic blockades or disrupt traditional commercial relationships. Agricultural policies under Decebalus emphasized food security and surplus production that could support military operations while maintaining civilian populations during potential siege conditions or territorial disruption caused by military campaigns. Dacian agricultural communities received instruction in food preservation techniques, storage facility construction, and crop diversification that would provide reliable food supplies regardless of specific military or political circumstances. These agricultural preparations reflected sophisticated understanding of the logistical requirements for sustained military resistance and the importance of maintaining civilian support during prolonged conflicts. Craft production expansion during the Decebalus period focused on military equipment manufacturing while maintaining traditional artistic and cultural activities that reinforced Dacian identity and social cohesion. Weapons production facilities throughout Dacian territories increased their output of falx blades, spear points, arrowheads, and defensive equipment while developing quality control procedures that ensured consistent performance standards. These manufacturing improvements required skilled craftsmen, specialized tools, and raw material supplies that demonstrated the kingdom's industrial capabilities and economic organization. Religious policies under Decebalus maintained traditional Zalmoxian worship while adapting spiritual practices to support military resistance and political unity among diverse populations. Religious ceremonies increasingly emphasized themes of sacrifice for collective defense, divine support for righteous resistance against foreign oppression, and spiritual rewards for those who died defending Dacian independence. These religious adaptations provided psychological preparation for warfare, while maintaining cultural traditions that distinguished Dacian identity from Roman cultural influences. The integration of religious authority with military leadership under Decebalus created unified command structures that could coordinate both spiritual and temporal aspects of resistance efforts while maintaining legitimacy among populations that valued traditional religious practices. Religious leaders throughout Dacian territories provided both spiritual guidance and practical support for military preparations, using their community influence to encourage recruitment, resource contribution, and civilian cooperation with military requirements. This integration of religious and military authority created comprehensive resistance capabilities that addressed both material and psychological aspects of prolonged conflict. Social organization under Decebalus maintained traditional tribal structures while introducing modifications that enhanced military effectiveness and administrative efficiency. Warrior bands that had traditionally operated as independent units received integration into larger military formations that could coordinate tactical operations while maintaining the personal loyalty relationships that provided motivation and unit cohesion. These organizational changes required careful balance between military efficiency and cultural authenticity that preserved warrior traditions while creating capabilities necessary for confronting professional Roman armies. The development of specialized military roles within Dacian society created professional classes of engineers, intelligence operatives, diplomatic representatives, and logistical specialists who possess skills essential for sophisticated military operations. These specialized roles required training programs, career advancement opportunities, and social recognition that attracted talented individuals while creating institutional knowledge that could survive individual casualties and maintain operational effectiveness during extended conflicts. The emergence of military professionalization within traditional Dacian society represented significant cultural adaptation that enhanced collective capabilities while preserving essential cultural characteristics. Cultural achievements during the Decebalus period reflected both traditional Dacian artistic traditions and innovations that incorporated influences from contact with diverse civilizations while maintaining distinctive Dacian identity. Metalworking techniques reached unprecedented sophistication, producing decorative objects, religious artifacts, and ceremonial weapons that demonstrated advanced technical skills and aesthetic sensibilities. These cultural productions served both practical functions and symbolic purposes that reinforced Dacian identity while demonstrating cultural sophistication to external observers. Architectural developments during this period combined defensive functionality with symbolic expression of Dacian power and cultural achievement. Construction projects at major sites incorporated monumental scale and technical innovation that showcased Dacian capabilities while serving practical, military and administrative functions. The integration of defensive, administrative, and ceremonial architecture created impressive complexes that demonstrated Dacian organizational abilities and cultural sophistication to both internal and external audiences. Military engineering projects undertaken by Decebalus included not only fortification construction, but also transportation network development, communication system establishment, and logistical infrastructure creation that could support coordinated military operations across extensive territorial regions. Road construction connected major fortification sites while providing rapid movement capabilities for military forces and supply convoys. Signal tower networks enabled rapid communication across mountainous terrain that would otherwise have prevented coordinated tactical operations. Supply depot construction created strategic reserves of weapons, food, and equipment that could sustain military operations during extended campaigns or siege conditions. The preparation of defensive positions throughout Dacian territories involved careful terrain analysis and strategic planning that maximized natural advantages while creating coordinated defensive networks capable of mutual support and strategic flexibility. Mountain passes received fortification that could channel enemy forces into predetermined killing zones, while providing protected withdrawal routes for defending troops. River crossings were prepared for demolition that could prevent enemy advance, while maintaining friendly force mobility through alternative crossing points. These defensive preparations demonstrated sophisticated military engineering capabilities and strategic planning that reflected detailed study of potential Roman invasion routes and tactical options. Intelligence preparation of the battlefield included detailed mapping of Roman military installations, assessment of enemy capabilities and limitations, and identification of strategic vulnerabilities that could be exploited through offensive operations. Dacian reconnaissance activities provided information about Roman supply lines, communication networks, and defensive positions that enabled strategic planning and tactical preparation for specific military operations. This intelligence gathering represented systematic military preparation that went far beyond traditional tribal warfare methods and demonstrated sophisticated understanding of modern military requirements. The coordination of military preparations across diverse territorial regions and tribal groups required administrative capabilities and communication systems that could maintain unity of command while respecting local autonomy and cultural differences. Decebalus developed hierarchical command structures that provided clear authority relationships while maintaining flexibility for local adaptation and initiative. These organizational innovations created military capabilities that combined the advantages of centralized coordination with the benefits of decentralized execution that could adapt to changing tactical situations and local conditions. The military preparations that Decebalus had orchestrated throughout his kingdom would face their ultimate test when Marcus Ulpius Traianus ascended to the imperial throne in 98 AD. Unlike his predecessors who had approached the Dacian question with varying degrees of caution and diplomatic maneuvering, Trajan brought to power a clear vision of imperial expansion that identified Dacia as both a strategic necessity and an opportunity for the kind of military glory that would cement his position among Rome's greatest emperors. The new emperor possessed extensive military experience from campaigns in Germania and Spain, providing him with practical knowledge of frontier warfare and the logistical challenges involved in conquering well-defended barbarian territories. Trajan's strategic assessment of the Dacian situation recognized that Decebalus had created a unified kingdom whose military capabilities, territorial extent, and economic resources posed fundamental threats to Roman control over the entire Danube frontier region. Intelligence reports reaching Rome described sophisticated Dacian fortifications, professional military organization, and alliance networks that could potentially inspire other barbarian peoples to challenge Roman authority throughout southeastern Europe. The emperor understood that allowing Decebalus to consolidate his gains and further strengthen Dacian capabilities would create increasingly dangerous threats to imperial security that might ultimately require far more extensive military resources to address effectively. The wealth generated by Dacian gold mines had become a crucial factor in Roman strategic calculations, as imperial finances faced mounting pressures from military expenses, infrastructure projects, and social programs that required reliable revenue sources. Roman economic analysts estimated that successful conquest of Dacia could provide sufficient precious metal resources to fund major imperial initiatives while eliminating the costs associated with maintaining defensive positions along an unstable frontier. The prospect of capturing intact mining operations, rather than destroying them through prolonged warfare, created incentives for decisive military action that could achieve rapid conquest before Dacian forces could implement scorched earth strategies. Trajan's military preparations for the Dacian campaign involved unprecedented logistical planning and resource mobilization that reflected both the scale of the intended operation and lessons learned from previous Roman experiences in difficult terrain. The emperor assembled a force of approximately 150,000 troops drawn from legions stationed throughout the empire, including veteran units with extensive experience in siege warfare, mountain operations, and engineering projects. The 2nd Adiutrix, 4th Flavia Felix, 7th Claudia, and 1st Minervia legions formed the core of the invasion force, supplemented by numerous auxiliary units that provided specialized capabilities in cavalry operations, archery, and siege engineering. Engineering preparations for the campaign included the prefabrication of siege equipment, bridge construction materials, and specialized tools designed for operations in mountainous terrain where traditional Roman engineering advantages might prove less effective. Roman military engineers studied detailed intelligence reports about Dacian fortifications, developing specific techniques and equipment designed to overcome Burebista construction methods that had previously proven resistant to conventional siege warfare approaches. The preparation of specialized artillery pieces, including improved ballista and catapult designs, reflected Roman determination to achieve technological superiority that could compensate for Dacian advantages in defensive terrain. The First Dacian War commenced in 101 AD with Roman forces crossing the Danube at multiple points simultaneously, implementing a strategic plan designed to prevent Dacian forces from concentrating their entire military strength against any single invasion route. Trajan personally commanded the main invasion force that crossed near modern-day Drobeta, Turnus, Severin, while secondary forces established bridgeheads at strategic locations that could provide mutual support while threatening multiple Dacian defensive positions. This multi-axis invasion strategy forced Decebalus to divide his forces among several threatened areas, preventing him from implementing concentrated defensive strategies that might have proven more effective against a single large invasion force. Roman engineering capabilities demonstrated their superiority immediately through the rapid construction of pontoon bridges that enabled heavy equipment and supply trains to cross the Danube despite Dacian attempts to contest the river crossings. Roman engineers had prefabricated bridge components that could be assembled quickly under combat conditions, providing tactical mobility advantages that Dacian forces found difficult to counter effectively. The speed of Roman bridge construction prevented Dacian defenders from organizing coordinated attacks against vulnerable Roman forces during river crossing operations, establishing Roman footholds on the north bank before effective defensive responses could be implemented. The initial phase of the Roman invasion encountered fierce resistance from Dacian forces that demonstrated the effectiveness of their military reforms and defensive preparations. Dacian warriors equipped with falx weapons proved capable of inflicting severe casualties on Roman infantry formations, particularly during close combat engagements where the curved blades could exploit gaps in Roman armour and shield formations. Roman commanders quickly learned to respect Dacian combat capabilities, implementing tactical modifications that emphasized missile weapons, coordinated formation attacks, and engineering solutions that could reduce direct infantry confrontations where Dacian weapons proved most effective. The advance towards major Dacian strongholds required Roman forces to overcome numerous defensive positions that Decebalus had prepared throughout the approach routes to his mountain strongholds. Each defensive position required systematic siege operations that consumed time, resources, and manpower, while enabling Dacian forces to inflict casualties and delay Roman progress towards strategic objectives. Roman military engineers developed specialized techniques for reducing Dacian fortifications, including the use of undermining operations, concentrated artillery bombardments, and coordinated assault tactics that could overcome the advantages provided by Burebista construction methods. The Second Battle of Tapae became the decisive engagement of the first campaign, as Roman forces under Trajan's direct command encountered the main Dacian army in a carefully prepared defensive position that maximized Dacian tactical advantages while minimizing Roman superiority in equipment and organization. The battlefield featured steep slopes, dense forest cover, and prepared obstacles that channeled Roman forces into predetermined killing zones where Dacian Falx warriors could exploit their weapons' effectiveness against Roman formations. The battle commenced with extensive skirmishing as both armies manoeuvred for tactical advantage while assessing enemy capabilities and intentions. Roman tactical deployments at Tupae reflected lessons learned from earlier encounters with their Dacian forces, emphasizing coordinated artillery support, disciplined formation movements, and systematic exploitation of Roman advantages in armor protection and organizational coordination. Roman commanders positioned ballista and catapult units to provide suppressive fire against Dacian positions, while legionary formations advanced in coordinated waves that could maintain formation integrity, despite difficult terrain and fierce resistance. The Roman tactical approach emphasized steady pressure and systematic reduction of Dacian defensive positions, rather than attempting decisive breakthrough operations that might prove vulnerable to Dacian counterattacks. Dacian defensive tactics at Tupae demonstrated sophisticated understanding of their own capabilities and limitations, while maximizing advantages provided by terrain selection and prepared positions. Decebalus positioned his forces to take maximum advantage of slope protection and forest cover, while creating multiple fallback positions that could sustain organized resistance, even if initial defensive lines were penetrated. Dacian commanders coordinated attacks by Falx-armed heavy infantry with supporting missile fire and cavalry operations designed to disrupt Roman formation movements and create opportunities for decisive counterattacks against exposed Roman units. The effectiveness of Dacian Falx weapons against Roman equipment became particularly apparent during the close combat phases of the battle, as the curved blades proved capable of hooking around Roman shields and delivering devastating cuts to exposed limbs and necks. Roman soldiers found their traditional scutum shields less effective against Falx attacks than against conventional weapons, as the curved blade design could exploit shield positioning and deliver strikes from unexpected angles. Roman military observers noted that Falx wounds were typically more severe than those inflicted by straight-bladed weapons, creating psychological effects that reduced Roman combat effectiveness even when casualties remained within acceptable limits. Roman tactical adaptations during the battle included the deployment of specialized anti-Falx formations that emphasized coordinated spearwork and missile support, designed to keep Dacian warriors at distances where their distinctive weapons could not be employed effectively. Roman commanders positioned auxiliary archers and slingers to provide continuous harassment of Dacian formations, while legionary spearmen created defensive screens that prevented close combat engagements, where Falx weapons proved most dangerous. These tactical innovations required careful coordination and disciplined execution under combat conditions, demonstrating Roman military professionalism and adaptability under pressure. The resolution of the Second Battle of Tupae came through systematic Roman pressure that gradually wore down Dacian resistance, rather than through any single decisive action or breakthrough operation. Roman artillery units maintained continuous bombardment of Dacian positions, while infantry formations advanced methodically through prepared obstacles and defensive positions. The combination of Roman technological advantages, superior logistics, and disciplined tactical execution eventually overcame Dacian advantages in terrain, motivation, and individual combat skills, forcing Dacian forces to withdraw from their prepared positions to avoid complete destruction. Dacian withdrawal operations demonstrated sophisticated military planning and execution that preserved significant portions of Decebalus's army for future operations, while denying Roman forces the complete victory that might have ended Dacian resistance immediately. Dacian commanders implemented coordinated delaying actions that slowed Roman pursuit while protecting their main forces during withdrawal to secondary defensive positions. The effectiveness of Dacian withdrawal operations prevented Roman forces from achieving the decisive destruction of enemy military capabilities that would have made continued resistance impossible. The aftermath of Taipei required Roman forces to continue systematic reduction of Dacian defensive positions while managing extended supply lines and mounting casualties that reflected the intensity of Dacian resistance. Roman engineering capabilities proved essential for maintaining offensive momentum, as military engineers constructed roads, bridges and supply depots that enabled continued operations in difficult terrain despite Dacian efforts to disrupt Roman logistical arrangements. The construction of permanent Roman installations throughout conquered territory demonstrated imperial intention to maintain control over captured areas while providing bases for continued offensive operations. Trajan's bridge represented the most remarkable engineering achievement of the entire campaign, demonstrating Roman technical capabilities while providing strategic advantages that fundamentally altered the military situation along the Danube frontier. The bridge construction project, supervised by the architect Apollodorus of Damascus, involved the creation of massive stone piers that could support a wooden superstructure capable of handling heavy military traffic under all weather conditions. The bridge location near modern-day Drobeta Turnu Severin provided optimal engineering conditions while offering strategic access to Dacian territories that could support sustained military operations. The technical specifications of Trajan's bridge reflected sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering, structural mechanics, and construction techniques that represented the pinnacle of Roman engineering achievement. The bridge measured approximately 1,135 meters in length, featuring 20 stone piers that rose to heights of up to 60 meters above the river surface. Each pier required massive stone foundations that could withstand flood conditions, ice damage, and potential sabotage attempts, while supporting wooden arch structures that provided the actual roadway surface. The construction project required coordinated labour forces, specialised equipment, and engineering expertise that demonstrated Roman organisational capabilities and technical knowledge. The strategic implications of Trajan's bridge extended far beyond its immediate military utility, as the permanent crossing facility enabled rapid deployment of Roman forces into Dacian territory while providing secure supply lines that could support extended military operations regardless of seasonal conditions or enemy interference. The bridge eliminated Dacian advantages derived from controlling Danube crossings while providing Roman commanders with tactical flexibility that could respond quickly to changing military situations. The psychological impact of the bridge construction on both Roman and Dacian populations demonstrated imperial engineering capabilities and determination that influenced political calculations throughout the region. Construction challenges during the bridge project included managing river conditions, coordinating massive material requirements, and maintaining work schedules despite potential enemy interference and difficult weather conditions. Roman engineers developed innovative construction techniques that could place massive stone blocks in swift river currents while maintaining precise alignment and structural integrity essential for long-term durability. The project required quarrying operations, transportation networks, and specialised construction equipment that represented major logistical undertakings, requiring coordination among multiple military and civilian organisations. The completion of Trajan's bridge enabled Roman forces to maintain continuous pressure on Dacian positions, while providing secure withdrawal routes that reduced risks associated with extended operations in enemy territory. Roman military planners could now implement strategic options that had been previously impossible due to logistical constraints and crossing vulnerabilities. The bridge facility provided capabilities for rapid reinforcement, supply resupply, and tactical flexibility that fundamentally altered the strategic balance between Roman and Dacian forces. The temporary peace settlement that concluded the First Dacian War reflected both Roman strategic objectives and practical limitations that prevented immediate complete conquest of Dacian territories. Roman forces had achieved significant tactical victories and captured important Dacian positions, but the campaign had also revealed the substantial costs and challenges involved in conquering well-defended mountain territories held by determined defenders. Trajan recognized that complete conquest would require additional resources, time, and military preparations that might be better accomplished through a temporary settlement that could provide opportunities for more thorough preparation. The peace terms negotiated between Trajan and Decebalus established Dacia as a Roman client kingdom with specific obligations regarding tribute payments, military assistance, and territorial arrangements that served Roman strategic interests, while preserving Dacian political autonomy under Roman oversight. Decebalus agreed to dismantle certain fortifications, provide hostages as guarantees of compliance, and accept Roman garrisons at strategic locations that could monitor Dacian activities while providing bases for future military operations if necessary. These terms provided Rome with significant strategic advantages, while allowing Decebalus to maintain authority over his kingdom and prepare for potential future conflicts. Roman strategic calculations regarding the peace settlement recognized that temporary accommodation could provide opportunities for intelligence gathering, logistical preparation, and political development that would enhance prospects for successful future military operations. Roman administrators could use the peace period to establish more effective supply networks, gather detailed intelligence about Dacian capabilities and intentions, and develop political relationships with potential Dacian allies who might support Roman objectives during future conflicts. The settlement also provided time for Roman military units to recover from campaign casualties while incorporating lessons learned from combat experience with Dacian forces. Dacian strategic objectives during the peace negotiations focused on gaining time for military preparation, diplomatic alliance building, and economic recovery that could enhance resistance capabilities for inevitable future confrontations with Roman forces. Decebalus recognized that Roman imperial objectives ultimately required complete conquest of Dacia, making the peace settlement a temporary respite rather than permanent resolution of the conflict. The Dacian king used the peace period to strengthen fortifications, expand military training programs, and develop alliance relationships that could provide additional support during future military operations. The implementation of peace terms created ongoing tensions and disputes that reflected fundamental incompatibilities between Roman imperial objectives and Dacian independence aspirations. Roman demands for tribute payments, territorial concessions, and military restrictions conflicted with Dacian traditions and political requirements that made complete compliance difficult or impossible. These implementation difficulties provided pretext for future military action, while creating political pressures that made renewed conflict increasingly likely, despite temporary accommodation agreements. Intelligence activities during the peace period involved extensive information gathering by both sides, as Roman and Dacian representatives sought to assess enemy capabilities, intentions, and vulnerabilities that could provide advantages during future conflicts. Roman intelligence operations focused on mapping Dacian fortifications, assessing military capabilities, and identifying potential political divisions that could be exploited during future military campaigns. Dacian intelligence gathering emphasized Roman military preparations, strategic planning, and political developments that might indicate timing and objectives for renewed Roman military action. The Second Dacian War erupted in 105 AD when accumulated tensions and mutual suspicions made continued peaceful coexistence impossible, despite formal treaty obligations that theoretically governed Roman-Dacian relationships. Roman accusations of Dacian treaty violations provided justification for renewed military action, while Dacian preparations for resistance indicated recognition that conflict had become inevitable, regardless of diplomatic efforts to maintain peace. Both sides had used the intervening period to enhance their military capabilities and strategic positions, setting the stage for more decisive military confrontation than had occurred during the first campaign. The decisive victory at Sarmizegetusa Regia in 106 AD marked not merely the end of Dacian independence, but the beginning of one of Rome's most ambitious provincial experiments. As the smoke cleared from the burning capital and Decebalus' suicide eliminated the last symbol of organised resistance, Trajan faced the monumental task of transforming a fiercely independent warrior kingdom into a productive Roman province. The emperor's vision extended far beyond simple military occupation. He intended to create a model province that would demonstrate Rome's capacity for cultural transformation, while extracting maximum economic benefit from Dacia's legendary mineral wealth. The establishment of the Roman province of Dacia required immediate administrative decisions that would shape the region's development for generations. Trajan appointed Decimus Terentius Scaurianus as the first provincial governor, selecting an experienced administrator who had demonstrated competence in managing complex territorial transitions and diverse populations. Scaurianus arrived in Dacia with explicit instructions to implement comprehensive Romanization policies while maintaining sufficient military presence to prevent renewed resistance from surviving Dacian populations scattered throughout the mountainous regions where Roman control remained tenuous. The administrative organisation of Roman Dacia followed established provincial models while incorporating modifications necessary for governing territories with unique geographical and demographic characteristics. The province was initially divided into two main administrative regions: Dacia Superior, encompassing the former heartland of Decebalus' kingdom, including the Orasti Mountains and surrounding areas, and Dacia Inferior, covering the eastern and southern territories that had been less thoroughly integrated into the Dacian political system. This division reflected both practical administrative considerations and strategic recognition that different regions would require varying approaches to integration and control. Roman administrative centres established throughout the new province served multiple functions as military bases, commercial hubs, and symbols of imperial authority that demonstrated Rome's permanent commitment to maintaining control over conquered territories. The selection of sites for these administrative centres reflected careful consideration of strategic location, defensive capabilities, communication networks, and economic potential that could support sustained Roman presence while facilitating integration of local populations into imperial systems. The founding of Ulpia Traiana Sarmizegetusa represented the most significant urban development project in the new province, creating a Roman city that would serve as the provincial capital while symbolically replacing the destroyed Dacian stronghold with a monument to Roman civilization. The new city's location in the Hunidora region provided strategic advantages including defensive terrain, water access, proximity to mineral resources, and communication links with other major settlements throughout the province. Roman urban planners designed Ulpia Traiana Sarmizegetusa according to standard Roman city planning principles, while incorporating modifications necessary for local geographical conditions. The urban layout of Ulpia Traiana Sarmizegetusa featured the characteristic Roman grid pattern, with a central forum surrounded by public buildings, including a basilica, temples, baths, and administrative offices that provided essential services while demonstrating Roman architectural sophistication. The city's construction required massive labour forces, including both voluntary workers attracted by employment opportunities and conscripted populations, who provided manual labour for major construction projects. Archaeological evidence indicates that the city's development proceeded rapidly, with major public buildings completed within the first decade of Roman occupation. Residential districts within Ulpia Traiana Sarmizegetusa reflected the social hierarchy that characterized Roman colonial societies, with wealthy Roman colonists occupying substantial houses featuring advanced amenities including hypocauste heating systems, mosaic floors, and private bath facilities. Middle-class residents, including Roman citizens of modest means and successful local merchants, lived in smaller but well-appointed houses that demonstrated their integration into Roman social and economic systems. Working-class populations occupied apartment buildings and smaller houses that provided basic accommodation while maintaining Roman urban standards. Commercial districts within the new capital featured shops, workshops, warehouses and market facilities that supported both local economic activity and long-distance trade relationships connecting Dacia with the broader Roman commercial networks. The establishment of Roman commercial law and standardized weights and measures facilitated trade relationships while providing legal protections that encouraged investment and economic development. Market facilities included specialized areas for different types of goods, with particular emphasis on trading precious metals, agricultural products, and manufactured items that reflected the province's economic priorities. Religious architecture in Ulpia, Traiana, Sarmizegetusa incorporated both traditional Roman temples and syncretic religious structures that accommodated local spiritual traditions within acceptable Roman frameworks. The construction of a Capitolium dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva established the official Roman religious presence, while temples dedicated to other Roman deities provided worship opportunities for colonists from different regions of the empire. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain Dacian religious practices continued in modified forms that did not challenge Roman political authority or social order. The massive colonization program implemented throughout Roman Dacia represented one of the most extensive population transfer initiatives in Roman imperial history, bringing settlers from across the empire to establish Roman demographic dominance while providing skilled labour and administrative expertise necessary for provincial development. Trajan's colonization policies aimed to create stable Roman communities that could maintain imperial control while extracting maximum economic benefit from Dacian resources and strategic location. Colonist recruitment drew upon diverse populations throughout the Roman Empire, including veterans from the Dacian campaigns who received land grants as rewards for military service, civilian volunteers attracted by economic opportunities in a resource-rich province, and skilled craftsmen whose expertise was essential for developing mining operations and urban infrastructure. The diversity of colonist origins created cosmopolitan communities that reflected the multicultural character of Roman imperial society, while maintaining Roman cultural and political identity. Veteran settlements established throughout Dacia provided both agricultural development and military security through the creation of defensible communities populated by experienced soldiers who could respond quickly to security threats while developing productive agricultural operations. These veteran colonies received land grants that included both agricultural plots and urban properties, creating economic incentives that encouraged permanent settlement while maintaining military readiness. Archaeological evidence indicates that veteran settlements featured standardized layouts with central defensive positions surrounded by agricultural lands that could support community populations during emergency conditions. Civilian colonists included merchants, craftsmen, administrators, and farmers who sought economic opportunities in a province where Roman investment and development projects created demand for diverse skills and services. The colonial administration provided various incentives, including tax exemptions, land grants, and legal privileges that encouraged immigration, while ensuring that newcomers possessed skills essential for provincial development. The selection process for civilian colonists emphasized individuals who could contribute to economic development while maintaining loyalty to Roman political and cultural values. The demographic transformation of Dacia proceeded systematically as Roman colonists established communities throughout territories that had been depopulated through warfare or abandoned by Dacian populations who fled to avoid Roman control. Population estimates suggest that Roman colonization brought several 100,000 settlers into Dacia during the first generation of imperial control, creating Roman demographic majorities in key urban centres and strategic regions while maintaining mixed populations in rural areas where surviving Dacian communities continued agricultural activities under Roman supervision. Integration policies implemented by Roman administrators aimed to create unified provincial populations that combined Roman colonists with surviving Dacian communities through legal, economic, and cultural mechanisms that encouraged cooperation while maintaining Roman political dominance. These integration efforts included intermarriage between Roman and Dacian populations, economic partnerships that combined Roman capital with local knowledge and labour, and educational programs that taught Latin language and Roman customs to local populations seeking advancement within imperial systems. Economic exploitation of Dacian resources commenced immediately following military conquest, with Roman engineers and administrators implementing systematic extraction programs that maximized precious metal production while developing agricultural and commercial activities that could support sustained imperial investment. The legendary wealth of Dacian gold mines had provided primary motivation for Trajan's conquest, and Roman mining operations aimed to extract maximum value from these resources while maintaining production levels that could support both local development and imperial revenues. Gold mining operations in the Carpathian Mountains received immediate attention from Roman engineers who possessed advanced extraction techniques and organizational capabilities that could significantly increase production beyond levels achieved under Dacian administration. Roman mining methods incorporated hydraulic systems that used diverted water to wash gold-bearing gravels, underground shaft construction that could access deeper ore deposits, and processing techniques that achieved higher recovery rates from ore materials. Archaeological investigations at sites like Rosia, Montana, reveal extensive Roman mining installations, including processing facilities, worker housing, and administrative buildings that supported large-scale extraction operations. The scale of Roman mining operations required massive labour forces that included both free workers attracted by relatively high wages and slave populations that provided manual labour for dangerous underground work. Roman mining communities developed distinctive social structures that reflected the dangerous and profitable nature of mining work, with successful miners achieving considerable wealth while maintaining awareness of occupational hazards that made mining careers both lucrative and potentially short-lived. The development of mining settlements required supporting infrastructure, including food production, equipment manufacturing, and transportation networks that connected mining areas with broader provincial economic systems. Silver mining operations complemented gold extraction activities while requiring different technical approaches and processing methods that Roman engineers adapted to local geological conditions. Silver ore deposits in Dacian territories typically occurred in combination with lead ores that required cupellation processes to separate valuable silver from base metals. Roman metallurgists established processing facilities that could handle large volumes of ore, while maintaining quality standards necessary for monetary and commercial applications. The integration of silver mining with existing Roman monetary systems provided immediate economic benefits while supporting provincial development through increased money supply and commercial activity. Agricultural development throughout Roman Dacia emphasized both subsistence production necessary to support growing populations and commercial agriculture that could generate export revenues while reducing dependence on imported food supplies. Roman agricultural techniques introduced to Dacian territories included improved ploughing methods, crop rotation systems, and livestock management practices that increased productivity while maintaining soil fertility over extended periods. The fertile plains and valleys that had supported Dacian agricultural communities provided excellent foundations for expanded Roman agricultural operations. Roman colonists brought agricultural knowledge from their regions of origin, creating diverse farming systems that combined Mediterranean crops with local agricultural traditions adapted to Dacian climate and soil conditions. Wheat and barley production expanded significantly under Roman administration, providing staple grains for both local consumption and export to other provinces. Viticulture received particular attention as Roman colonists established vineyards that could produce wine for local markets, while potentially developing export capabilities that could compete with established wine-producing regions throughout the empire. Livestock operations expanded under Roman administration as colonists introduced improved breeding techniques and management practices that increased production of meat, dairy products, leather, and wool, essential for both local consumption and commercial trade. Cattle herding benefited from Roman veterinary knowledge and selective breeding programs that improved animal health and productivity. Sheep and goat operations expanded in mountainous regions, where these animals could utilize marginal grazing lands while producing wool and other products for textile manufacturing and export trade. Integration into Roman trade networks provided Dacian producers with access to markets throughout the empire, while creating demand for Dacian products that encouraged economic diversification and development. Roman commercial law and standardized business practices reduced transaction costs and legal uncertainties that had limited previous trade relationships, enabling Dacian merchants to participate effectively in long-distance commerce. The construction of improved transportation infrastructure, including roads, bridges and port facilities, enhanced connectivity with major trade routes while reducing shipping costs and delivery times. The cultural transformation of Dacia under Roman administration involved systematic efforts to introduce Roman language, law, architecture, and social customs, while managing the persistence of local traditions that did not conflict with imperial political objectives. Roman cultural policies aimed to create provincial populations that maintained loyalty to imperial authority while contributing productively to economic and social development. These cultural transformation efforts required careful balance between promoting Roman civilization and respecting local customs that could be incorporated into acceptable hybrid cultural forms. Latin language adoption proceeded through multiple channels, including official administrative requirements, educational opportunities, and economic incentives that made Latin proficiency essential for advancement within Roman social and economic systems. Roman schools established in major urban centres provided Latin instruction for both Roman colonist children and local populations seeking integration into imperial society. The gradual spread of Latin throughout Dacian territories created common communication capabilities while facilitating cultural integration and administrative efficiency. Roman law implementation replaced traditional Dacian legal customs with imperial legal systems that provided standardized procedures for property rights, commercial transactions, criminal justice, and civil disputes. Roman legal principles emphasized written law, formal procedures, and appeals processes that provided greater predictability and protection for individual rights than had been available under traditional tribal legal systems. The introduction of Roman citizenship opportunities for qualified local populations created incentives for cultural integration while expanding the base of individuals with full legal rights and protections. Architectural transformation throughout Roman Dacia involved both the construction of new buildings according to Roman standards and the modification of existing structures to accommodate Roman functional requirements and aesthetic preferences. Roman architectural techniques introduced to Dacia included concrete construction, arch and vault systems, hypocaust heating, and decorative elements that demonstrated Roman engineering capabilities while providing improved functionality and comfort. Public buildings constructed in Roman style served both practical functions and symbolic purposes that demonstrated imperial civilization and authority. Urban planning principles applied to Dacian settlements created organized city layouts with proper drainage, water supply, waste management, and transportation systems that improved public health and quality of life, while demonstrating Roman administrative competence. The construction of aqueducts, sewers, and paved streets in major settlements provided infrastructure that supported larger populations, while maintaining sanitary conditions essential for urban development. Public amenities including baths, theatres and amphitheatres provided recreational and cultural opportunities that enhanced urban life, while promoting Roman social customs. Religious practices under Roman administration involved the introduction of official Roman cults, while permitting local religious traditions that could be adapted to Roman frameworks or practiced privately without challenging imperial authority. The construction of Roman temples and the establishment of official priesthoods created institutional religious structures that supported imperial political authority while providing spiritual services for Roman colonists. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain Dacian religious practices continued in modified forms, particularly in rural areas where Roman cultural influence remained limited. The persistence of Dacian traditions reflected both the practical limitations of cultural transformation efforts and deliberate Roman policies that permitted local customs which did not threaten political stability or economic productivity. Dacian craft traditions continued in modified forms that incorporated Roman techniques and aesthetic preferences while maintaining distinctive local characteristics. Traditional Dacian metalworking skills proved particularly valuable for Roman mining and manufacturing operations, creating economic incentives for preserving and developing local technical expertise. Archaeological evidence from Roman Dacian sites reveals complex cultural synthesis that combined Roman and Dacian elements in ways that created distinctive provincial cultures, reflecting both imperial integration and local adaptation. Pottery styles, decorative motifs, burial practices, and domestic architecture show evidence of cultural mixing that produced hybrid forms incorporating elements from both traditions. These archaeological materials demonstrate that cultural transformation in Roman Dacia involved mutual adaptation rather than simple replacement of local traditions with Roman customs. The development of Romano-Dacian cultural identity proceeded through generations of interaction between Roman colonists and local populations, creating provincial cultures that maintained loyalty to Roman political authority while incorporating local elements that reflected specific regional conditions and historical experiences. This cultural synthesis provided foundations for stable provincial society that could support Roman economic and political objectives while maintaining social cohesion and cultural continuity that facilitated long-term imperial control over territories that had previously resisted Roman expansion through fierce military resistance. The comprehensive Romanization policies implemented throughout Dacia during the reigns of Trajan and his successors, despite their systematic nature and imperial backing, could not entirely erase the deep-rooted cultural traditions and population groups that had developed over centuries of independent Dacian civilization. Even as Roman colonists established dominant positions in urban centres and fertile agricultural regions, significant Dacian communities persisted in remote mountainous areas where Roman administrative control remained limited, and where traditional ways of life could continue with minimal interference from imperial authorities. These surviving populations maintained not only their physical presence, but also crucial elements of Dacian cultural identity that would prove remarkably resilient throughout the period of Roman occupation. The Carpathian mountain ranges provided natural refuges for Dacian populations who chose resistance over accommodation, creating isolated communities that preserved traditional social structures, religious practices, and economic activities beyond the reach of systematic Roman cultural transformation efforts. Archaeological evidence from high-altitude settlements indicates continued occupation of sites that had been established during the pre-conquest period, with material culture showing gradual adaptation to changed circumstances rather than complete abandonment of traditional practices. These mountain communities developed sophisticated strategies for maintaining autonomy while avoiding direct confrontation with Roman military forces that might have resulted in their destruction or forced relocation. The persistence of traditional Dacian settlements in areas like the Retisat Mountains, the Phaegarus Range, and the remote valleys of the Apuseni Mountains reflected both geographical advantages and deliberate strategies for cultural preservation. These locations offered defensive terrain that made Roman military operations difficult and expensive, while providing access to natural resources including timber, pasture land and mineral deposits that could support self-sufficient communities. The scattered nature of these settlements made systematic Roman control impractical, as the costs of maintaining permanent garrisons in remote mountain locations far exceeded the potential economic or strategic benefits. Dacian resistance activities during the Roman period took various forms, ranging from passive non-compliance with imperial administrative requirements to active sabotage of Roman economic and military installations. Mountain-based Dacian communities conducted periodic raids against Roman mining operations, transportation networks, and isolated settlements, while avoiding major confrontations that might provoke overwhelming Roman retaliation. These resistance activities required careful coordination among scattered communities and sophisticated intelligence networks that could monitor Roman activities while planning operations that maximized damage to imperial interests while minimizing risks to Dacian populations. The organization of resistance activities reflected traditional Dacian military culture adapted to the realities of operating under Roman occupation. Small bands of warriors maintained traditional weapons and fighting techniques while developing new tactics suited to guerrilla warfare against Roman targets. The falx continued to serve as both a practical weapon and a symbol of Dacian resistance, with archaeological finds from this period showing continued production and use of these distinctive curved blades in areas beyond direct Roman control. Resistance leaders emerged from traditional warrior classes who possessed both military skills and community authority necessary to organize and sustain opposition activities. Intelligence networks supporting Dacian resistance operations included both formal communication systems among mountain communities and informal information gathering through contacts with Romanized Dacians who maintained covert sympathies for independence movements. These networks provided essential information about Roman military movements, administrative policies, and economic activities that enabled resistance groups to plan effective operations while avoiding Roman countermeasures. The effectiveness of Dacian intelligence gathering reflected both traditional tribal communication methods and adaptations learned through observation of Roman administrative and military procedures. Economic activities within resistant Dacian communities emphasized self-sufficiency and traditional production methods that could operate independently of Roman commercial systems while providing necessary goods and services for community survival. Traditional metalworking continued in remote areas where Dacian smiths produced tools, weapons, and decorative objects using techniques that had been developed over generations of independent cultural development. Agricultural practices maintained traditional crop varieties and farming methods that were well adapted to local environmental conditions, while requiring minimal external inputs or commercial relationships. Religious practices among resistant Dacian populations preserved traditional Zalmoxian worship and associated ritual activities that maintained spiritual connections with pre-conquest cultural identity. Sacred groves and religious sites in remote mountain locations continued to serve as centers for traditional ceremonies and community gatherings that reinforced cultural cohesion while providing spiritual justification for continued resistance to Roman authority. The persistence of traditional religious practices reflected both genuine spiritual commitment and deliberate cultural preservation strategies that maintained distinctive Dacian identity despite Roman efforts to promote imperial religious systems. Beyond the mountainous refuges of active resistance, significant populations of free Dacian tribes maintained independence along the extended frontiers of Roman territorial control, where imperial authority gradually diminished with distance from major administrative centres and military installations. The Carpi, who controlled territories in the region between the Carpathian Mountains and the Dniester River, represented the largest and most organised of these independent Dacian groups. Archaeological evidence indicates that the Carpi maintained sophisticated political organisation, military capabilities, and economic systems that enabled them to function as autonomous political entities while engaging in complex relationships with both Roman authorities and other barbarian peoples. The Carpi tribal confederation encompassed multiple subgroups that controlled extensive territories in modern-day eastern Romania and Moldova, maintaining traditional Dacian cultural practices while adapting to changed strategic circumstances created by Roman expansion. Carpi settlements featured defensive fortifications that incorporated both traditional Dacian construction techniques and innovations learned through observation of Roman military architecture. The distribution of Carpi archaeological sites indicates territorial organization that controlled important river crossings, trade routes, and agricultural areas while maintaining communication networks among scattered tribal groups. Carpi military organization preserved traditional Dacian warrior culture while developing capabilities necessary for confronting Roman military forces and competing with other barbarian peoples for territorial control and economic resources. Carpi warriors continued to employ falx weapons alongside spears, shields, and archery equipment that provided tactical flexibility for different combat situations. The maintenance of professional warrior classes within Carpi society enabled sustained military operations while preserving cultural traditions that distinguished Carpi identity from both Roman and other barbarian cultures. Political structures within Carpi territories maintained traditional Dacian leadership patterns while adapting to the complex diplomatic requirements of operating in a region where multiple powers competed for influence and control. Carpi chiefs balanced relationships with Roman authorities, other Dacian groups, Germanic tribes, and Sarmatian peoples through diplomatic strategies that preserved Carpi independence while avoiding conflicts that might result in territorial losses or population displacement. The sophistication of Carpi diplomatic activities reflected both traditional Dacian political skills and learning acquired through generations of interaction with diverse cultures and political systems. Economic activities among the Carpi emphasize both traditional subsistence production and commercial relationships that provided access to goods and materials not available within their territorial boundaries. Carpi agricultural practices maintained traditional crop varieties while incorporating innovations that increased productivity and food security. Livestock operations focused on cattle, sheep, and horses that provided both subsistence products and trade goods for exchange with neighbouring peoples. Craft production included metalworking, pottery, textile manufacturing, and woodworking that supplied both domestic needs and export products for commercial exchange. The Costoboci represented another significant free Dacian tribal group that maintained independence in the mountainous regions between Dacia and the Black Sea coast, preserving traditional cultural practices while developing specialized economic activities that provided foundations for political autonomy. Costoboci territories included important mountain passes and river valleys that controlled access routes between Roman Dacia and the Pontic region, creating strategic advantages that enabled successful resistance to Roman expansion efforts. Archaeological evidence from Costoboci sites indicates continued occupation of traditional settlement locations with material culture, showing both cultural continuity and selective adoption of external influences. Costoboci's social organization maintained traditional tribal structures while developing specialized roles and institutions necessary for managing complex relationships with neighboring peoples and adapting to changing economic and political conditions. Costoboci communities included both agricultural settlements in fertile valleys and pastoral groups that utilized mountain grazing areas through seasonal migration patterns. The integration of agricultural and pastoral economic activities provided economic diversification that enhanced community resilience while maintaining traditional cultural practices associated with both lifestyle patterns. Military capabilities among the Costoboci reflected both traditional Dacian warrior culture and adaptations necessary for defending mountainous territories against various external threats. Costobucci fortifications incorporated natural defensive features while adding constructed elements that enhance defensive capabilities without requiring massive labour investments. The strategic location of Costobucci territories enabled them to control access routes, while maintaining communication networks with other independent Dacian groups and potential allies among neighbouring peoples. Religious practices among free Dacian tribes preserved traditional spiritual beliefs and ritual activities, while adapting to changed circumstances that required modified approaches to community religious life. Traditional sacred sites continued to serve as centres for religious observances, while new ritual practices developed to address specific challenges associated with maintaining cultural identity under external pressure. The persistence of traditional religious practices among free Dacian populations provided spiritual foundations for cultural resistance, while maintaining community cohesion necessary for political and military organisation. Archaeological evidence for the survival of Dacian cultural elements within Roman Dacia reveals complex patterns of cultural persistence, adaptation, and synthesis that demonstrate the limitations of Roman cultural transformation efforts despite their systematic implementation and imperial support. Material culture from Roman Dacian sites shows continued production and use of objects that incorporate distinctively Dacian design elements, manufacturing techniques, and functional characteristics alongside Roman-style artifacts. These archaeological materials indicate that Dacian cultural traditions persisted not only among resistant populations in remote areas, but also within Romanized communities where cultural mixing produced hybrid forms that maintained Dacian elements within acceptable Roman frameworks. Pottery production throughout Roman Dacia continued to include vessels that employed traditional Dacian forms, decorative motifs, and manufacturing techniques, while also incorporating Roman stylistic elements and functional requirements. Archaeological analysis of ceramic assemblages from both urban and rural sites reveals gradual evolution of pottery styles that maintained recognizable Dacian characteristics while adapting to Roman cultural preferences and practical needs. The persistence of traditional pottery forms reflects both continued use by Dacian populations and appreciation by Roman colonists who found local ceramic traditions functionally superior for certain applications. Metalworking traditions within Roman Dacia preserved distinctive Dacian techniques and aesthetic preferences while incorporating Roman technological innovations and stylistic influences. Archaeological discoveries of metalwork from the Roman period include jewellery, tools, and decorative objects that combine Roman and Dacian design elements in ways that created distinctive provincial styles. The continued production of falx weapons, even in modified forms, indicates persistence of traditional metalworking skills and cultural symbols, despite Roman efforts to control weapon production and discourage resistance activities. Burial practices throughout Roman Dacia show evidence of cultural synthesis that combined Roman funeral customs with traditional Dacian mortuary practices, creating hybrid burial traditions that reflected both imperial cultural influence and local cultural persistence. Cemetery excavations reveal graves that include both Roman-style grave goods and objects that reflect traditional Dacian spiritual beliefs and cultural practices. The diversity of burial practices within individual cemeteries indicates complex cultural mixing among populations that included Roman colonists, Romanized Dacians, and individuals who maintained stronger connections to traditional cultural practices. Placename evidence throughout the former Roman province of Dacia provides crucial testimony to the survival of Dacian linguistic and cultural elements despite intensive Romanization efforts and extensive population changes. Toponymic analysis reveals numerous placenames that derive from Dacian linguistic roots, indicating either continued occupation by Dacian-speaking populations or cultural memory that preserved traditional geographical designations despite political and demographic changes. The distribution of Dacian-derived place names corresponds closely with areas where archaeological evidence indicates persistent Dacian cultural elements, suggesting systematic patterns of cultural survival rather than random preservation of isolated linguistic elements. River names throughout the Carpathian region show particularly strong evidence of Dacian linguistic persistence, with major waterways retaining names that can be traced to pre-Roman Dacian linguistic traditions. The Meuse, Alt, Dew, and numerous smaller rivers bear names that derive from Dacian linguistic roots, indicating either continued use by Dacian-speaking populations or adoption of traditional names by later populations who recognize their geographical appropriateness. The persistence of river names reflects both practical considerations related to navigation and commerce and cultural continuity that maintained traditional geographical knowledge across political transitions. Mountain and hill names throughout the former Dacian territories similarly preserve numerous examples of pre-Roman linguistic elements that indicate either population continuity or cultural memory that maintain traditional geographical designations. The analysis of mountain names reveals systematic patterns that correspond with areas where other evidence indicates Dacian cultural persistence, suggesting coordinated preservation of traditional geographical knowledge, rather than random survival of isolated linguistic elements. These toponymic patterns provide important evidence for understanding the geographical distribution of cultural survival and the mechanisms through which traditional knowledge was preserved across generations. Settlement names throughout the region include numerous examples that incorporate Dacian linguistic elements, either as complete traditional names or as components within hybrid designations that combine Dacian and Latin elements. The analysis of settlement toponymy reveals complex patterns of cultural interaction that produced various forms of linguistic synthesis, reflecting different degrees of Romanization and cultural change. Some settlements retained traditional Dacian names throughout the Roman period, while others developed hybrid names that incorporated both Dacian and Roman elements in ways that reflected their mixed cultural character. Religious practices within Roman Dacia preserved numerous elements of traditional Dacian spiritual beliefs and ritual activities despite official promotion of Roman religious systems and the construction of Roman temples and religious institutions. Archaeological evidence indicates continued use of traditional sacred sites, often with modifications that incorporated Roman architectural elements while maintaining essential Dacian ritual functions. The persistence of traditional religious practices reflects both genuine spiritual commitment and deliberate cultural preservation efforts that maintained distinctive Dacian identity within acceptable Roman frameworks. Sacred grove traditions continued in modified forms throughout the Roman period, with archaeological evidence indicating maintained reverence for specific forest locations that had served religious functions during the pre-conquest period. These sacred sites often received architectural enhancements that incorporated Roman construction techniques while preserving essential ritual spaces and traditional ceremonial functions. The continued use of sacred groves indicates both the persistence of traditional spiritual beliefs and the flexibility of Roman religious policies that permitted local practices which did not challenge imperial political authority. Funerary practices throughout Roman Dacia incorporated traditional Dacian beliefs about death and afterlife alongside Roman mortuary customs, creating syncretic burial traditions that reflected complex cultural mixing. Archaeological analysis of cemetery sites reveals burial practices that include traditional Dacian grave goods, ritual procedures, and spatial organization combined with Roman funeral customs and Christian influences that appeared during the later imperial period. The diversity of burial practices indicates continued cultural complexity rather than simple replacement of traditional customs with Roman alternatives. Material culture evidence for Dacian cultural persistence includes numerous categories of artifacts that maintain traditional forms, decorative elements, and manufacturing techniques while incorporating selective Roman influences. Traditional Dacian jewellery styles continued production throughout the Roman period, with archaeological discoveries revealing brooches, bracelets, and other ornamental objects that preserve distinctive Dacian aesthetic preferences while incorporating Roman technical innovations and decorative motifs. The continued production of traditional jewellery styles indicates both cultural preference and market demand that supported maintenance of traditional craft skills. Textile production throughout Roman Dacia maintained traditional techniques and decorative patterns while incorporating Roman materials and stylistic influences that created hybrid textile traditions. Archaeological evidence of textile production includes spindle whorls, loom weights, and fabric fragments that demonstrate continued use of traditional manufacturing methods alongside Roman textile technologies. The preservation of traditional textile patterns and techniques reflects both practical considerations related to local environmental conditions and cultural preferences that maintained distinctive Dacian aesthetic traditions. The role of Dacian cultural heritage in the formation of later Daco-Romanian identity represents one of the most significant and controversial aspects of southeastern European ethnogenesis, involving complex processes of cultural transmission, linguistic development, and identity formation that occurred over many centuries following the Roman withdrawal from Dacia. The relationship between ancient Dacian cultural elements and later Romanian cultural development requires careful analysis of archaeological, linguistic, and historical evidence, while recognizing the limitations and uncertainties inherent in tracing cultural continuity across extended periods of political and demographic change. Linguistic evidence for Dacian cultural continuity in later Romanian development includes substrate elements within the Romanian language that appear to derive from pre-Roman linguistic traditions, though the identification and interpretation of these elements remain subject to scholarly debate. Romanian linguistic features that may reflect Dacian influence include phonological characteristics, vocabulary items, and grammatical structures that differ from standard Latin development patterns and may indicate influence from non-Latin linguistic traditions. The analysis of potential Dacian substrate elements requires careful consideration of alternative explanations, including influence from other non-Latin languages and internal linguistic developments that may have produced similar results. The geographical distribution of Romanian-speaking populations corresponds partially with areas of former Roman Dacian control, though the relationship between ancient territorial boundaries and later linguistic distribution involves complex historical processes that cannot be simply explained through direct cultural continuity. Romanian linguistic development occurred within a broader context of population movements, political changes, and cultural interactions that influenced linguistic evolution in ways that may have obscured or modified original relationships between ancient and medieval cultural patterns. Cultural practices among later Romanian populations include numerous elements that may reflect continuity with ancient Dacian traditions, though identifying specific connections requires careful analysis that distinguishes between genuine cultural continuity and coincidental similarities that may result from comparable environmental conditions or parallel cultural developments. Traditional Romanian agricultural practices, craft techniques, religious customs, and social organisation include features that may derive from pre-Roman cultural traditions, though demonstrating direct continuity requires evidence that can distinguish inherited cultural elements from later adoptions or independent developments. The gradual erosion of Roman control over Dacia began long before Emperor Aurelian's formal decision to abandon the province in 271 AD, reflecting the mounting pressures that had been building throughout the turbulent 3rd century. The crisis of the 3rd century had stretched Roman military resources to their breaking point, with simultaneous threats along multiple frontiers forcing imperial commanders to make increasingly difficult strategic choices about which territories could be defended effectively and which represented unsustainable drains on imperial resources. The Dacian province, despite its legendary gold wealth, had become increasingly expensive to maintain as barbarian raids intensified and the costs of frontier defence escalated beyond the economic benefits that could be extracted from the region. Gothic raids into Dacia had begun as early as 238 AD, when these Germanic peoples crossed the Danube and penetrated deep into Roman territory, demonstrating the vulnerability of the province's extended frontier defences. The Goths possessed military capabilities that Roman forces found difficult to counter effectively, particularly their mobility and ability to concentrate forces rapidly against isolated Roman positions, before disappearing to territories beyond Roman control. These raids inflicted significant damage on Roman settlements, mining operations, and transportation networks, while creating psychological pressure on colonist populations who began questioning the imperial government's ability to provide adequate protection. The Carpi, those free Dacian tribes who had maintained independence beyond Roman territorial boundaries, intensified their own raids during this period of Roman weakness, seeking to reclaim territories that had been lost during Trajan's conquest. Carpi military operations demonstrated sophisticated planning and coordination, targeting Roman supply lines, isolated garrisons, and economic installations, while avoiding major confrontations that might provoke overwhelming Roman retaliation. The persistence of Carpi resistance activities reflected both opportunistic aggression and systematic efforts to undermine Roman control over territories that Carpi leaders considered rightfully Dacian. Sarmatian peoples from the eastern steppes added another dimension to the barbarian pressure facing Roman Dacia, conducting cavalry raids that exploited their mobility advantages to strike Roman settlements and withdraw before defensive forces could respond effectively. Sarmatian military tactics emphasized rapid movement and hit-and-run attacks that disrupted Roman economic activities, while avoiding the sustained combat that might favor Roman military organization and equipment advantages. The combination of Gothic, Carpi, and Sarmatian pressure created multiple simultaneous threats that exceeded Roman defensive capabilities given the limited military resources available for frontier defense. Roman military responses to these mounting pressures revealed the fundamental strategic dilemma facing imperial commanders who lacked sufficient forces to defend all threatened positions while maintaining offensive capabilities necessary for decisive victory over barbarian enemies. Defensive strategies that concentrated Roman forces in fortified positions provided better protection for specific locations, but abandoned large areas to barbarian control, effectively ceding territorial authority while failing to address the underlying security problems. Offensive operations that sought to defeat barbarian forces in their own territories required military resources that were needed for defense of more strategically important regions closer to the imperial heartland. The economic costs of maintaining Roman control over Dacia escalated dramatically as military expenses increased, while productive capacity declined due to constant warfare and population displacement. Gold mining operations, which had provided the primary economic justification for maintaining Roman control, suffered significant disruption as barbarian raids targeted mining installations and transportation networks essential for moving precious metals to imperial mints and treasuries. Agricultural production throughout the province declined as rural populations fled to fortified positions or abandoned the region entirely, reducing the tax base that could support military expenses. Urban centres throughout Roman Dacia experienced significant population decline, as both Roman colonists and Romanized Dacians sought security in more stable regions of the empire. Archaeological evidence from major cities like Ulpia, Traiana, Sarmizegetusa indicates reduced construction activity, abandoned residential districts, and defensive modifications to public buildings that reflect the deteriorating security situation. The urban infrastructure that had represented Roman civilization's achievements in Dacia gradually fell into disrepair as maintenance resources were diverted to military needs, and population decline reduced demand for urban services. Imperial decision-making regarding Dacia's future involved complex calculations that balanced the province's economic value against the costs of continued defence and the strategic implications of territorial abandonment. Aurelian's assessment concluded that Dacia had become a strategic liability that absorbed military resources needed for more critical frontier defence, while providing insufficient economic benefits to justify continued imperial investment. The emperor recognised that abandoning Dacia would create propaganda problems and potentially encourage barbarian aggression elsewhere, but the practical alternatives appeared even more problematic given the empire's limited resources and multiple simultaneous threats. The implementation of withdrawal from Dacia proceeded systematically as Roman administrators organised the evacuation of Roman citizens, military personnel, and portable wealth while destroying installations that might benefit barbarian occupiers. Roman engineers demolished fortifications, mining equipment, and transportation infrastructure to prevent their use by hostile forces, while military units conducted organised withdrawals that protected civilian evacuees during their movement to safer territories. The evacuation process required careful coordination among military commanders, civilian administrators, and local leaders who needed to balance security requirements with logistical constraints and political considerations. Resettlement of Dacian evacuees occurred primarily in the Moesian provinces south of the Danube, where imperial administrators established new communities that maintained Dacian cultural identity while integrating into existing provincial structures. The new province of Dacia Aureliana provided administrative framework for these resettled populations while preserving the symbolic continuity of Roman Dacian identity despite territorial abandonment. Archaeological evidence from the resettlement areas indicates that evacuees brought significant portable wealth and maintained distinctive cultural practices that distinguished them from existing provincial populations. The long-term consequences of Roman withdrawal from Dacia extended far beyond the immediate strategic and economic implications, fundamentally altering the demographic and cultural landscape of southeastern Europe in ways that would influence regional development for centuries. The abandonment of systematic Roman administration and military protection created power vacuums that various barbarian peoples competed to fill, leading to complex population movements and territorial reorganizations that established new political and cultural patterns throughout the Carpathian region. Gothic settlement in former Roman Dacian territories proceeded gradually as these Germanic peoples established control over strategic locations while adapting to the agricultural and economic opportunities available in regions that had been developed under Roman administration. Gothic communities utilized Roman infrastructure, where it remained functional while developing their own settlement patterns and economic activities that reflected their cultural traditions and environmental adaptations. The integration of Gothic populations with surviving Romanized and indigenous elements created complex cultural mixing that produced new hybrid communities with distinctive characteristics. The question of population continuity versus discontinuity in post-Roman Dacia represents one of the most contentious issues in southeastern European historiography, with profound implications for understanding the origins of later Romanian national identity and cultural development. The continuity theory argues that significant Romanized populations remained in Dacia after imperial withdrawal, maintaining Latin-based linguistic and cultural traditions that provided foundations for later Romanian ethnogenesis. Archaeological evidence supporting continuity includes material culture showing unbroken development patterns, settlement site continuity, and cultural practices that appear to bridge the gap between Roman and medieval periods. Migration theory proponents argue that Roman withdrawal involved comprehensive population evacuation that left Dacia largely depopulated, until later Slavic and other migrations brought new populations, who subsequently adopted Latin-based linguistic elements through contact with surviving Romance-speaking communities in neighbouring regions. This interpretation emphasises the disruption caused by barbarian invasions. The systematic nature of Roman evacuation procedures and the limited archaeological evidence for continuous occupation at many sites between the late Roman and early medieval periods. The linguistic evidence regarding Daco-Romanian continuity involves analysis of substrate elements within Romanian that may derive from pre-Roman Dacian languages, Latin linguistic developments that may reflect local environmental and cultural influences, and the geographical distribution of Romanian-speaking populations in relation to ancient territorial boundaries. Romanian linguistic features that support continuity arguments include phonological developments that may reflect Dacian substrate influence, vocabulary items that appear to derive from local rather than standard Latin sources, and grammatical structures that may indicate non-Latin linguistic influences during Romanian ethnogenesis. Archaeological discoveries throughout the 19th and 20th centuries have revolutionized understanding of Dacian civilization while providing crucial evidence for debates about cultural continuity and demographic change following Roman withdrawal. Systematic excavations at major Dacian sites have revealed sophisticated urban planning, advanced metallurgical techniques, complex religious architecture, and extensive trade networks that demonstrate the high level of cultural development achieved by Dacian society before Roman conquest. The excavations at Sarmizegetusa Regia, conducted primarily during the mid-20th century, uncovered extensive architectural remains that revealed the sophistication of Dacian urban planning and religious architecture. The sacred precinct contained multiple temple structures built with precisely fitted stone blocks, circular sanctuaries aligned with astronomical phenomena, and rectangular buildings that may have served administrative or ceremonial functions. The quality of stone masonry and architectural planning demonstrated at Sarmizegetusa Regia rivaled contemporary Roman construction techniques while maintaining distinctively Dacian aesthetic and functional characteristics. Archaeological investigations at other major Dacian fortifications, including Costesti Cetatuie, Blidaru and Piatra Rosi, have revealed the extent and sophistication of Dacian defensive systems while providing evidence for the social organisation and economic activities that supported these military installations. The Burebista construction technique, revealed through detailed archaeological analysis, demonstrated innovative engineering solutions that created defensive walls superior in many respects to contemporary Roman fortification methods. The integration of multiple defensive lines, sophisticated water management systems, and residential areas within fortified complexes indicated comprehensive planning capabilities that supported large populations during extended siege conditions. Material culture discoveries from Dacian sites have provided detailed evidence for craft production, artistic achievement, and technological innovation that characterized Dacian civilization at its zenith. Metalworking artifacts demonstrate advanced techniques for producing both utilitarian and decorative objects, with particular excellence in gold and silver working that reflects both technical skill and aesthetic sophistication. Pottery production revealed distinctive Dacian ceramic traditions, while showing selective adoption of external influences through trade contacts and cultural exchange. Religious artifacts discovered at Dacian sites have illuminated the spiritual beliefs and ritual practices that provided cultural cohesion and political legitimacy within Dacian society. Votive offerings, ceremonial vessels, and architectural elements associated with religious structures demonstrate the central role of Zalmoxian worship in Dacian cultural identity, while revealing the sophisticated theological concepts and ritual procedures that characterize Dacian religious practice. The integration of religious and political authority evident in archaeological remains helps explain the effectiveness of Dacian resistance to Roman expansion and the persistence of cultural identity despite military defeat. Modern scholarship on Dacian civilization has benefited from interdisciplinary approaches that combine archaeological evidence with linguistic analysis, comparative cultural studies, and historical source criticism to develop more comprehensive understanding of Dacian society and its historical significance. Romanian scholars have played particularly important roles in Dacian research, though their work has sometimes been influenced by nationalist perspectives that emphasize cultural continuity and Romanian ethnic origins in ways that may compromise objective historical analysis. International scholarly collaboration has enhanced Dacian studies by bringing diverse methodological approaches and theoretical perspectives to bear on complex historical questions, while reducing the influence of nationalist bias that has sometimes affected regional scholarship. Comparative studies of Dacian material culture with contemporary Celtic, Germanic, and Thracian traditions have provided broader contexts for understanding Dacian cultural development, while identifying distinctive characteristics that marked Dacian civilization as unique among ancient European societies. The development of Dacian studies as an academic discipline has involved ongoing debates about methodology, evidence interpretation, and the relationship between archaeological data and historical source materials. Early scholars relied heavily on classical literary sources that often provided biased or incomplete information about Dacian society, while modern researchers have emphasized archaeological evidence that can provide more objective insights into Dacian cultural practices and social organization. The integration of archaeological and textual evidence continues to present challenges that require careful methodological consideration and critical evaluation of source reliability. The role of Dacian heritage in modern Romanian national identity formation represents one of the most significant examples of how ancient history has been utilized in 19th and 20th century nation-building processes. Romanian intellectuals and political leaders have consistently emphasized connections between ancient Dacian civilization and modern Romanian culture as foundations for national identity claims and territorial legitimacy arguments. This nationalist interpretation of Dacian history has influenced educational curricula, cultural institutions, and political discourse in ways that have sometimes prioritized ideological objectives over historical accuracy. The mythologization of Dacian history and Romanian national culture has created heroic narratives that emphasize Dacian resistance to Roman imperialism while portraying Decebalus as a proto-nationalist leader defending Romanian ancestral territories against foreign conquest. These mythological interpretations often simplify complex historical processes while projecting modern nationalist concepts onto ancient societies that operated according to different political and cultural principles. The persistence of these mythological elements in popular culture and political rhetoric demonstrates the powerful influence of historical narratives on contemporary identity formation and political mobilization. Educational policies in modern Romania have consistently emphasized Dacian history as foundational to Romanian national identity, while promoting continuity theories that support claims for Romanian ethnic authenticity and territorial legitimacy. School textbooks and university curricula have traditionally presented Dacian-Romanian continuity as established historical fact rather than scholarly hypothesis, creating educational environments that discourage critical examination of alternative interpretations. These educational approaches have influenced multiple generations of Romanians while contributing to nationalist political movements that utilize historical claims for contemporary political objectives. Cultural institutions throughout Romania have promoted Dacian heritage through museums, monuments, festivals, and artistic productions that celebrate ancient Dacian achievements while emphasizing connections with contemporary Romanian culture. The National Museum of Romanian History in Bucharest features extensive Dacian collections that present archaeological discoveries within interpretive frameworks that emphasize cultural continuity and national identity themes. Regional museums throughout Transylvania and other areas of former Dacian territory have developed specialized exhibitions that promote local connections with ancient Dacian civilization, while supporting cultural tourism and regional identity formation. Political utilization of Dacian history has appeared in various forms throughout modern Romanian history, with different political movements and leaders emphasizing aspects of Dacian heritage that support their particular ideological objectives and policy programs. Communist-era Romanian politics under Nicolae Ceausescu particularly emphasized Dacian themes as alternatives to Soviet-influenced historical narratives, while promoting Romanian independence and cultural authenticity within the Eastern Bloc context. Post-communist Romanian politics has continued to reference Dacian heritage in debates about European integration, minority rights, and territorial disputes with neighbouring countries. Contemporary archaeological research continues to provide new evidence about Dacian civilization, while contributing to ongoing scholarly debates about cultural continuity, demographic change, and the relationship between ancient and modern populations in southeastern Europe. Recent discoveries at sites like Rosia, Montana, have revealed additional evidence for sophisticated Dacian mining operations, while raising contemporary political questions about environmental protection and cultural heritage preservation. The integration of modern scientific techniques, including radiocarbon dating, DNA analysis, and geographic information systems, has enhanced archaeological research capabilities while providing new types of evidence for historical interpretation. The legacy of Dacian civilization extends beyond academic historical research and nationalist political movements to influence contemporary cultural production, tourism development, and international perceptions of Romanian history and identity. Popular culture representations of Dacian history in films, novels, and other media have created widespread public awareness of ancient Dacian achievements, while often perpetuating mythological interpretations that may conflict with scholarly historical understanding. Cultural tourism based on Dacian heritage has become economically significant for regions that contain major archaeological sites, while creating incentives for heritage preservation and public education about ancient history. International scholarly recognition of Dacian civilization's historical significance has grown substantially as archaeological research has revealed the sophistication and complexity of Dacian society, while demonstrating its important role in ancient European cultural development. UNESCO World Heritage designation for the Dacian fortresses of the Oresti Mountains has provided international recognition for these archaeological sites, while establishing preservation standards and promoting scholarly research. Academic conferences, publications, and collaborative research projects have created international networks of scholars working on various aspects of Dacian history and archaeology. The enduring fascination with Dacian civilization reflects both the remarkable achievements of this ancient society and the contemporary relevance of questions about cultural identity, historical continuity, and the relationship between ancient heritage and modern national consciousness. The Dacians created a sophisticated civilization that successfully resisted Roman expansion for generations, while developing distinctive cultural traditions that influenced subsequent historical developments throughout southeastern Europe. Their ultimate conquest by Rome represented not merely military defeat, but the transformation of an entire cultural landscape that would never again achieve the political unity and cultural distinctiveness that had characterized the kingdom of Decebalus. The historical impact of Dacian civilization extends far beyond the chronological boundaries of their political independence, influencing cultural development, demographic patterns, and historical consciousness throughout southeastern Europe in ways that continue to resonate in contemporary political and cultural debates. Whether through direct population continuity, cultural transmission, or historical memory, the legacy of the Dacians remains a vital force in understanding the complex historical processes that have shaped modern Romania and the broader Carpathian region. The ongoing scholarly investigation of Dacian history and archaeology ensures that our understanding of this remarkable civilization will continue to evolve, while contributing to broader knowledge about ancient European societies and their enduring influence on subsequent historical development.